as they broke it to the world about May of this year and June especially. So give a warm welcome to Joyce Riley and Peter Kawaja.
Thank you very much. I am so honored to be here today, and I am also saddened to have to tell you what I have to tell you today. But I want to welcome all of you who love your country. I love my country, and I'm not afraid to admit it. We are not anti-government. We are the government. And it is because of some of the unfortunate dealings with the United States government that we must be here today. But it is because we are in support and because we are going to do something, because we do support our Desert Stormers as well as all veterans. I want to thank very much the Mid-America Constitutional Coalition for having us here, or conference for having us here. I want to thank especially Colonel Hobbs, Ann Funk, Mr. Panzer, and the wonderful Edgewood Theater. I am most impressed with what you have done here today. I want you to know that I am a Jayhawk. I am from Arkansas City, Kansas, and I'm proud of it. And I graduated from KU Medical Center. I had no idea that I would be back here 20-some years later after graduating to have to break this most unfortunate news. I have been a nurse for 25 years. I graduated, like I said, from this wonderful town. And I went about doing the kinds of things that I believed in with issues that affected nursing. I was always somewhat of a patient advocate, it seemed. I was involved, I don't know if you ever heard of the Janine Jones murder case in San Antonio, where Janine Jones murdered a number of babies. But I reported it and was told that I would be fired or sued for having done so. And they covered it up for 2 years. That is when I first lost my naivete, I guess, and realized that the establishment was not always right and not always interested in our best interest. I have more recently become an advocate after being a director of nursing in a hospital and after being involved in many, many issues that affect medical care. I initiated a radio program called Nurse Talk Radio. It's all the truth that you won't hear anywhere else. And that is where this story sort of begins. At least the visible part of this story begins. Because it was after I began searching as to why so many were sick that returned from Desert Storm that I had the avenue to go on the radio. And because we live in America and have a free press, I was able to get the information out. It was almost as if I was afraid that the main media would not cover it or cover the issues that are so important today. And so I decided I had to become part of the media. And in doing so, I was very fortunate to be able to learn what is affecting so many Desert Stormers. And I say that, fortunate to learn, because hopefully now we have the time to do something about it. I want to tell you a little bit about how this story all began. I know that's of real interest, is how did this information come out? Desert Storm was in 1990, 1991. Why is this information now just being relayed? Well, I was a reservist in the United States Air Force in the late 70s. I was stationed in Schenectady, New York, and flew on a C-130 aircraft and was a flight nurse and fulfilling my lifetime dream, literally. I got out of the reserves, but then went back in when I heard there was a war. And I heard that many people were going to be injured. And they said, we need trained flight nurses. I wanted to be involved. I knew and I believed in my country and knew that if they needed me, I would be there. I believed in the military, as I believe in the United States government and the United States of America. So I went to my lawyer, told him what I was going to do. He said, make out your will and plan your funeral. I then decided this was going to be serious. It was not an easy decision to make, to turn over my whole entire life and to go back into the reserves. My story is no different than anyone else. And for most of those that went to Desert Storm, it was much more difficult. I must say that I personally did not go into the theater of operations. I was only in the United States and countries airevacing some of the Desert Stormers back, but I did not go into the theater of operations. It became apparent to me after Desert Storm, I flew missions for about 6 months and returned, that they were very sick, that I was very sick, and that we had no answers, and no one would give us the answers. It was appalling to see people given psychiatric diagnoses and given excuses as to why they were ill. I was amazed that so many people could be feeling so badly, and yet they were all told it was due to stress. I searched out the reason for my particular problem and could not find anyone who would answer. I asked any numbers of people in my unit, the VA, no one would give me any answers. In fact, no one wanted to deal with it. I kind of went for the next 2 or 3 years without knowing anything. I received no information from my unit at Kelly Air Force Base, Texas. I received no information from anyone. The problems that these Desert Stormers were having were being ruled as just stress and psychiatric diagnosis even 2 and 3 years later when they were so sick. It was a very fortunate thing that about a year ago, an external asset for the Customs Department, who is not an employee of the Customs Department but who worked for them, contacted me and told me, "I know you're interested in the immunizations." I said, "Yes, I am. I am definitely interested in the immunizations. I want to know what happened. I want to know why we are sick." He showed me some documents. He came over to my house that night, showed me the documents, several binders full, and I knew then that he had the truth. I knew there was something going on that we were not being told. So I then decided I would find out the answer. I could not afford to purchase the documents because he wanted to sell them to me. So knowing then that my only recourse was to investigate it myself, I became an investigative reporter, I guess you would say. The only thing I could remember from the documents was seeing Dr. Nicholson's name, Garth and Nancy Nicholson. They are from the MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston, Texas. He is a Nobel Prize nominee. Dr. Nancy Nicholson is president of the Rodin Foundation. They were held in very high esteem. Having been a Nobel Prize nominee and having authored over 420 papers on cancer, I knew that this man knew what he was talking about. However, he had been discredited in the medical community of Houston, and I worked there. I worked in the Texas Medical Center, and I heard the information about these two off-the-wall scientists, if you will, that thought there was some germ warfare involved in Desert Storm. So I became interested in talking with them. I made an appointment with them, went to MD Anderson, and went to their home. And I found out they were incredible people. They were incredible people that would not stop in the face of threats, death threats, coercion, and intimidation. And they had found that, yes, there was a Mycoplasma incognitus bacteria that had been isolated from the Desert Stormers, and it was germ warfare. They had some of the information. I had nothing else to go by. I had no evidence. And it was a godsend when someone approached me and said, "You need to talk to a guy named Kawaja." I said, "A guy named Kawaja? What does that mean?" And I said, "Nobody's named Kawaja." And yes, there was a very real Peter Kawaja. I was put in touch with him, contacted him in Boca Raton, Florida, and we began several months of trying to develop a confidence level. It was not easy. He didn't trust me, and I didn't trust him. We faxed back for months and months, sometimes many times a day. And of course, developing a credibility in someone is very difficult, and it's also very tenuous. It can be broken very easily. And I am grateful, I am so grateful that he did not lose faith in me and that he did continue to communicate with me, because I did learn the truth behind the Gulf War. I will go into a little bit more about Peter Kawaja later, but simply to say to you that he is the key to this entire story. There is no one in this nation that has done as much for the Desert Stormers than Peter Kawaja, and they don't even know it yet. Peter is, in my estimation, a true hero. And I am so grateful that he didn't stop. And I am so grateful that he does not stop today, because he will continue regardless of the price that he must pay. And we have both made a decision not to stop. So it is our intent to continue to tell you the truth, to tell America the truth. And I can only say that we have been threatened, we have been told we will be silenced, and we have been told that we have no idea what is getting ready to happen to us. I simply want to say, if there are any federal agents in the audience, that we will not stop. I am a nurse. I have spent my life being a nurse and taking care of individuals who couldn't care for themselves. And now I can continue, and I will take care of the desert stormers that cannot take care of themselves, for they are very, very sick. I am not afraid to continue to do what we have to do, and I hope that you will not be afraid to stand up for a free America. We cannot live in tyranny. We must live and enjoy our freedom, and we must fight for it, whatever it takes. I want to say that that song, the Battle Hymn of the Republic, was so beautiful, and the rendition of it was so incredible. I thank you so much. That was the most beautiful song I've ever heard. It was so hard to go on after that, I must tell you, because we all love our country, and I was willing to die for my country, and now I'm willing to do it again if that's what it takes. But we have a problem that is so great in this nation, and it is only beginning to happen. It is not a story of the past. After meeting Peter and learning about the truth about the Gulf War Syndrome and the Nicholsons, I decided to go on my radio program May 6th of this year and tell the truth to Houston. Now you have to understand that in the city of Houston, you've got all the players involved because the germ warfare had its roots in the Houston community. According to the Drs. Nicholsons, they say that it was developed at the Baylor College of Medicine, Tanox Biosystems, with the knowledge of George Bush, James Baker III, and John Deutsch. The players are in Houston. All of those people except John Deutsch reside in Houston. So it was not an easy decision to do, but I knew I had to tell the truth. I was warned by one of the television stations not to do it, that they had a blackout on the media there, and that they warned me I should not go on with the story. We did have security in the studio. We also had someone to argue a TRO, a temporary restraining order, if we needed it. And it was with the idea that the truth had to get out. And that is really the initial way that we were able to get America to listen to us. Because I can assure you that Peter has for 5 years begged someone to listen to his story. He has literally begged. I begged it first, and we had no one that would listen. Because everyone said to me, how can a nurse from Missouri City, Texas, come up with this information on a nationwide scandal? And I said, I don't know. But it was given to me to do, and I will not stop. At this point, I would like to play a letter that I read to George Bush on the radio. This is a letter dedicated to George Bush, and I want him to understand exactly how we feel. It has been played several times, and I do hope that by now he has heard it. I'd like to read an open letter to President George Bush. This is from all veterans, from myself, from the people that love this country. I will either be deemed as one of the craziest or one of the bravest journalists to say what I have to you today. Mr. President, I want you to know who I am. I invited you to Houston to sign an organ donor card. You and Barbara signed organ donor cards and personally told me that you thanked me for what I was doing, and that if this had been available years ago, perhaps your daughter might not have died. Mr. President, I now beseech you to help save American veterans and their children now. We have released information to America that one of the Gulf War illnesses is a form of bacteria called Mycoplasma incognitus. It is communicable, it is devastating. It is here, and it is outbreak. This form of germ warfare has its development traced to biotech companies in Houston, with testing being done in the Texas prison system. The transfer of biologicals and chemical warfare to Saddam Hussein was through a Houston intermediary. Mr. President, this information has been duplicated many times over. America now knows the story. It is time for the death and destruction to stop. When you said you were declaring war on Saddam Hussein, I volunteered to return to the service of my country. I made out my will, and I was proud to serve as a captain in the United States Air Force Reserve, as a C-130 air evacuation flight nurse. I did not know that I would return 6 months later, very sick. Mr. President, I would have done anything for my country. It never crossed my mind that my country would harm me with germ and biological warfare. But Mr. President, I am unfortunately one of thousands. Many have already died. Many are ill, their spouses and children. It's over, Mr. President. America's most horrible secret is out. Mr. Clinton, we demand action by the President of the United States for the VA, the Department of Defense. Our men and women are suffering needlessly, and they are dying. Do not think that silencing any of us involved will silence our story. It would only make us stronger. We have risked everything to get this story out, and I can no longer bear the phone calls night and day from suffering veterans of the Gulf War, men and women, and now their families. The VA says that over 6,300 vets have died since the war. How many are due to germ warfare made by our own country? We want to stop the persecution of those who have been trying to tell the truth. This is not what America stands for. America, we truly love you, and we are sorry to have to report to its people what has been done in your name. Lady Liberty, this is one of your saddest days.
I can tell you.
Thank you very much. I can tell you that I was shaking when I did that on the radio. I knew what it meant to put that information on the air, and I also knew what it meant not to put that information on the air. So tonight I want to show you some of the information related to the Gulf War syndrome, and Peter will follow up with a lot of the government issues involved in the learning of how it was made and where it was made and what he has faced since that time. So we'll start with the transparencies. We'll kind of shift gears here and show you a little bit about the official, oops, excuse me. This is the official government stance. There is no Gulf disease. I hope you understand what is happening here. We have had almost 1 million of our veterans poisoned, and it has been being totally denied. You are hearing not just an important story. You are hearing the most important story of not the 20th century, if not this country's entire history. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the biggest case of media blackout and deceit and fraud and murder that this country has ever seen. There is, according to the Pentagon, no Gulf disease. Government study of veterans finds no evidence of Gulf War disease. There's no single mystery. There's no single a single mystery illness. That is true. They are saying there is no single mystery illness. That's because there are multiple biologicals used, and there are many diseases, not just one. They deny categorically no Gulf War disease. The symptoms did not stem from chemical agents or gas. The symptoms don't cluster into specific diseases or an identifiable syndrome. Rather, he said, what you have is a combination of symptoms and illnesses that you would expect to find in the general population. No, I don't think you find germ and biological warfare in the general population. This is from the Department of Veterans Affairs. They sent it to me. I don't recall the date, but it was directly faxed to me from them. Deaths in service since the Persian Gulf War, 5,729. 145 died during Desert Storm. How many deaths do you think should have occurred from normal, healthy young men since the war? On any given date, they will give you a different number of veterans that have died, anywhere from 2,500 to 6,500. This is unbelievable that they could continue this farce. These are the symptoms of chronic fatigue. And chronic fatigue is very closely associated with the Gulf War syndrome, so much so that we wonder if it may not be the same disease, or a portion of it may be the same disease. The Doctors Nicholson right now are doing a survey and a study, a small trial, to see if it is not very closely related. But you will see the aching joints being the biggest problem that Desert Stormers have. The aching joints are due to the mycoplasma incognitus, settling in the joints, the cells of the joints, the synovial cells. And the reason that it forms and the reason it creates a problem is that when it comes out, it takes a piece of the cell membrane with it, and it moves and migrates, thus creating an artificial form of arthritis. If the mycoplasma goes to the thyroid, it forms an artificial form of Graves' disease. You may have heard of President Bush and his wife and the dog that all had Graves' disease at the same time. Statistically, that's impossible to happen in any one family unless you've been exposed to the Gulf War illness. You'll see memory loss, sleep difficulties, headaches, skin rashes. Skin rashes are predominant, incredible numbers of skin rashes and very serious rashes. It is not a good sign. Concentration loss, depression. You can see why all of these items listed here, if you go to the doctor with any one of those, they're going to give you something for the joint pain or something for tired or something for the rash. And they didn't realize that it was part of a syndrome, an entire disease entity that these people had, and yet they treated each symptom. Now at the VA, they will not treat, they only do diagnostic tests. So these people are being refused treatment by the VA and the DoD. This is a comparison. The black bar is Gulf War syndrome, and the lined bar is chronic fatigue immune dysfunction syndrome. Those of you who are familiar with chronic fatigue, you'll understand that, but I won't go into chronic fatigue, but you can see how closely it relates. So we wonder what is going on. Finally, there was an article that came out about the government lying to the vets. We're able to get some media to pick up on the stories, but unfortunately the mainstream media right now is very slow to address the issue. This man, as you can see here, was a pilot in the Gulf War. He died and they ruled it a suicide. His family says it was Gulf War syndrome. We have such a problem right now that there is a baby registry that has been formed. There are so many deformed babies that they formed the ABDC Foundation. You see, over 1 million veterans went over there and they came back and they had children. And when they had children, they had deformed children. And they had very sick children. And they had miscarriages. And they had serious, serious problems, birth defects, not only birth defects, but deaths at birth. At the very top, you can see that's a Nation magazine quote, January of '95. Nation magazine says that 67% of all the affected Desert Stormers, that the Desert Stormers, out of the Desert Stormers, the affected ones, 67% of them are having babies that are either born deformed or with congenital problems. This is an incredible statistic, 67%. And you'll see babies born with Golden Haar syndrome, missing limbs, babies with chronic infections, failure to thrive. Golden Haar is either the missing limb or a missing eye. And so many of these babies are being born this way that I have information from one of the inside military intelligence people that there is a unit at one of the medical facilities, military medical facilities, just for these babies. Why doesn't America know about these babies? This is going to be a shock to you, I think. This was leaked to me, and I was surprised to find out that though we know that our veterans have been subjected to many forms of experimentation over the years, that all the way back to 1970, there was an appropriation made. The Department of Defense appropriated money. And I'll show you the project. This is stamped, and this is official, and it is in the official record. I hope that you are startled by this, and I hope you understand what you're seeing, because this is incredible information that most people have no idea exists. What you have up at the top is that within a period of 5 to 10 years, it would be possible to produce a synthetic biological agent, an agent that does not naturally exist and for which no natural immunity could be acquired. Do you understand what we're talking about? This is the AIDS virus. This is an official document from the Department of Defense in which they wanted to appropriate $10 million to develop a virus. You'll see that down in the next section, within the next 5 to 10 years, it would probably be possible to make an effective microorganism which could differ in certain important aspects from any known disease-causing organism. Most important of these is that it might be refractory to the immunological and therapeutic processes in which we depend to maintain our reactive freedom, freedom from, I can't hear it, thanks, relative freedom from infectious disease. A research program to explore the feasibility of this could be completed in approximately 5 years. Thank you, at a total cost of $10 million. Now, this last section is important also. It is a highly controversial issue, and there are many who believe such research should not be undertaken lest it lend to yet another method of massive killing of large populations. What we have is the beginning of a massive virus group of deaths, and this has continued and continued up to Desert Storm. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to know that in 1994, Senator Regal went to the floor of the Senate and told the Senate, we have evidence of biological warfare. He made it known through the Regal report. Senator Regal from Michigan, I think at great risk to himself, went forward with this information. He did it after much research from his staffer, Jim Tuitt. And what they did was put out a news release. And as you can see, biological warfare related materials were exported from the U.S. to Iraq prior to the Persian Gulf War. That does not say we think they were or they might have been. They were exported. I am deeply troubled that the United States permitted the sale of deadly biological agents to a country with a known biological warfare program. Down at the bottom, transmission of these illnesses to the spouses and children of these veterans. It's right there. It's in black and white, and the Senate heard it. Now, where is Mr. Dole? Where are the people that can make a difference with this? They knew it was communicable at that time, and no one did anything. The United States and Iraq are signatories of the 1972 Biological Warfare Convention, which restricts the use and proliferation of biological warfare agents. Its advanced and aggressive biological warfare program was the most advanced in the Arab world. We knew that. We made the biologicals. We knew it. We sold it. This is part of the Regal report. It came off the internet, and I'm going to, if you have access to the internet, you might want to get this. I want to just read a few sections from it because I think this is incredible information that has been available and no one has done anything about this. The Department of Defense steadfastly refuses to acknowledge this aspect of the problem. Their blanket denials are not credible. To my mind, there is no more serious crime than an official military cover-up of facts that could prevent more effective diagnosis and treatment of sick U.S. veterans. It is an astonishing example of the lengths the Defense Department is going in order to deny reality. He shows his evidence there of the gas mask that cause illnesses similar to Gulf War syndrome. British and U.S. Army reports. We have had reports from other countries, not just the United States. This is an important example of a pattern of deliberate misrepresentation of the truth. It is an appalling record. This is from Senator Regal on the floor of the Senate. The evidence continues to grow that they will go to any length to deny the facts surrounding the subject. This entire report is full of evidence of why biologicals were used. And you know, no one did anything. And the VA has denied, and the DOD has denied up until last week. And now many more Desert Stormers have not only died, but they've infected their wives, their spouses, and their children. A major threat to the health and well-being of a significant and rapidly growing number of individuals, and warrants a serious and all-out urgent effort by the government to determine the precise causes of the illnesses. We knew it in '94. We knew it before then. In fact, it was known before Desert Storm, and Peter Kawaja will tell you about why it was known before Desert Storm. This is a letter that should shock you and should make you angry also to know that Senator Regal notified the Secretary of Defense on February 9th of 1994. A great deal of evidence that U.S. forces may have been exposed to chemical and possibly biological warfare agents. He received reports of these illnesses being transmitted to the spouses and children of these veterans. He contacted then the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta and the U.S. Department of Commerce. After receiving the export information from the U.S. Department of Commerce, the next one, from at least 1985 through 1989, the period for which records were available, the United States government approved the sale to Iraq quantities of potentially lethal biological agents that could have been cultured or grown. Those are some of the items shipped. And notice, not only do we know that it was done, but we know who it was shipped to. The Iraqi agencies, such as the Iraq Atomic Energy Commission, Iraq Ministry of Higher Education, the State Company for Drug Industries, the Ministry of Trade. These are the items that were sent. These are some of the items. Anthrax, you can see that it is often fatal. Clostridium botulinum. Now underneath, look at the dates that they were shipped. We have absolute proof. The brucellosis has now been determined to be the second biological other than the Mycoplasma incognitus. Brucellosis, or the brucella, is one of the biologicals that has been isolated from one of the Desert Stormers in Walter Reed Hospital. By the way, Clostridium perfringens, that was on the end of that, Clostridium perfringens is gas gangrene. More of the items shipped to Iraq. Now I want to show you the information that went to the Senate. They received not only the information that it was shipped, but the dates and to who it went to. These are all man-made biologicals. What they have done is they have messed with Mother Nature. Okay, you can do the next one. Thanks. I just want to show you that this information was available for those of you who have an interest in certain biologicals. Incredible numbers of biologicals were shipped over there. Something like 200,000 pounds of biologicals were shipped to Iraq, and then we put our veterans in harm's way. This is Dr. Garth and Dr. Nancy Nicholson that I told you about. Many of you have heard them on the radio. They are PhD cell biology researchers. They have incredible histories of being very competent professionals. And when they went forward with this information, it was with a lot of background, because Nancy herself had received the Mycoplasma infection while working at Baylor College of Medicine. She almost died. She went down to 70 pounds, and she had the treatment with the doxycycline, which is now seen as the best antidote that we have available. It is not a treatment, it is an antidote. Then Dr. Garth Nicholson's stepdaughter came back from Iraq, and she had been involved in the deep insertions in Iraq with the 101st Airborne. She came back very sick, gave it to the family, and gave it to the family cat. They were all tested, and they knew that if anybody could find out what was wrong with them, it would be the Nicholsons. They went to the lab, researched it, and found it was something called Mycoplasma incognitus. It is man-made, and it is very, very difficult to find. It is a very difficult test to run. It takes either a forensic PCR, a polymerase chain reaction test, or a gene tracking method, and it's only done at the MD Anderson Cancer Center. And I want to tell you, the MD Anderson Cancer Center is practically a mile all the way around. It is huge. It is one of the most well-known cancer centers in the world. And they have been doing this research at their own expense because the government will not support it and will not help them, and they are testing Desert Stormers' blood. You can get your blood tested. It has to be shipped to Houston, and we'll provide you the information so you can learn, if you're a Desert Stormer, how to do that. But that is who they are, and I must say that they are incredible people for having done what they are doing. They have isolated just the one bacteria, the Mycoplasma incognitus, and they're utilizing doxycycline, a tetracycline antibiotic. If you're allergic to Cipro, it is recommended to use, if you're allergic to tetracycline, it's recommended that you use Cipro. I am not a physician. I am not practicing medicine. I am simply telling you what was in the Journal of the American Medical Association, February 22nd, 1995, entitled Desert Storm and Doxycycline. I want to read this letter to you. I just got it recently. Dear ma'am, today I heard your program on WDJC here in Birmingham and was so happy to hear that someone still cares. I originally served in the active army during the Gulf War. I was in a military intelligence unit in Germany, the 207th MI Brigade. I served proudly as my father did in World War II in the Navy. When I started feeling bad, my father told me I must have war fatigue. But no worries, I'll be better. Then I heard of other Gulf vets being ill and dying. I was concerned. At that time, my fiancé told me to go to the VA and get checked out. I did. They gave me an exam, and later I received a letter to the psych center. I've never been, nor have I ever needed to go to such a place. In my opinion, he gave me a few quack tests and put me on Prozac. He said I was depressed. I'm not the depressed type. After a while, he gave up. I pray to you, don't ever give up on us. If I had extra, I would send some to help financially. I know it is draining to your accounts. Please send some information. Also, please send information on the blood test. God bless you. That's one Desert Stormer that's still alive, and he knows he's sick, and we must reach them. We have to reach them. This is a letter from a mother in Kansas City. I recently received this, and I wanted to contact her to be here tonight, but I was not able to find her because she did not leave her address. As we listened, we were shocked and devastated. Tears and anguish hit our innermost being, part of our souls. She heard on the Chuck Harder show that her son was probably sick. After being gone that follow-up year in 1991, it was about fall time or late summer when he got back to Germany, he had a rash upon him. Wasn't much. What I heard today shook me and our souls trembled. These young men and women who served our country gave their all, proud to do it for America. But what did the United States government do? Turned their backs on our servicemen and women. My God, I cried in my heart and soul. They wore the gas masks. What kind of government do we have that would not support our troops out on the battlefield? And I must ask that question. What kind of government would we have that would do that to our troops?
Terrorist government.
Yes, you're right. But what about him and his men, and where are they? This here mom cares about them all. I call them all mine, and bless them wherever they are. Today, for the first time, I heard they died, and how. My God, help us all. And what is this United States government doing? Threatening the ones who are telling the truth to the American people. We as Americans need to get behind each service member and encourage them, like I do my son, praying for you and your men and him. We have killed our own, our best service people. The government of ours in this letter, I'm asking this government of ours in this letter to give our service people the medicine, vitamins, therapy, whatever would help the vets to get well. This incredible lady from Kansas City, I wish I could meet her. There's no money amount that would be enough for this here mom. Money doesn't buy my kind of son. But sure would help a lot of others in his own family if he could just pass on from this germ-killing gases. Those who have already gone, may God comfort all those families and help each one. This USA mom cares and loves you all. You have my prayers and support. Mr. Bush, I'm sorry for you and for our government. God's punishment is far worse than mine or the American people can ever give. Amen. Amen. Love and prayers, a USA mom. Thank you. When I come back to Kansas City, I hope to have her at the next meeting, and I will be back here in Kansas City in October. We're going to be talking about this subject, hopefully, to everywhere in the country. This message has to get out. We must move, and we must move fast, because we have a window of about 2 years to be able to take care of this disease before it takes care of us. You can be affected. It is contagious. It is not just a disease of the past. It is continuing on. And I want you to know that I understand the responsibility and the accountability of everything that I'm saying to you here today, that I do not do this lightly. And I understand that most programs, after we finish, I get calls from people on our hotline that are in tears because they have just learned that they are ill or the ones they love are ill. And not just a rash, but that they're very ill. And I want to give this number out because anyone who wants information regarding the Gulf War syndrome can call the American Gulf War Veterans Association. Peter Kawaja and I have formed this organization for two things. Number one, we want to tell the world what's going on with the Desert Stormers and to raise money to treat them. We want to provide Dr. Nicholson the money at the Rodin Foundation to be able to treat them. There's no one else that is doing it, and we will need all of your help. If you care about our veterans and if you understand that they were willing to die, then understand that they should not have to come back and die on their own soil. The number of the second thing, the reason that we formed the Gulf War Veterans Association is to bring criminal charges for those who have been involved. Yes. There is no worse crime than to kill your own. There is no worse crime to kill those than to kill those who went to die for their country. And I've had so many young men call me, and they're so grateful. They're so grateful that anyone even still remembers. Because, you know, when we had the Desert Storm buttons and the pins, the yellow ribbons were important, and we cared then. And we've got to care now. The number for the American Gulf War Veterans Association is 713-587-5437. That's 713-587-5437. We want you to be a part of our organization. We want your support. We want your prayers. We want your heartfelt support. We want your financial support, because it is not popular to be doing what we're doing, I can assure you, but we will not stop. I also want you to know that some veterans recently called me, and I want you to hear their story just briefly, is that one young man who went over there was on the very front, who went up into Iraq, came back. He was 27 years old. He was in a wheelchair when he came back 6 months after he returned. Now his wife is in a wheelchair, and now their child is in a wheelchair. And the VA says there's nothing wrong. In the Mississippi Guard, there's a young lady who called me and said, my husband went over there, he came back so sick. Now I'm so sick, we cannot work, and we have 2 deformed children. This is not the America that we used to have. And we must return America back to what it was. And we must save our veterans, because without them, we cannot continue in our battle. We have to have a strong military. And with that, I want to introduce to you Mr. Peter Kawaja, and it is really my distinct pleasure. Because you see, if there was ever an American hero, it is Peter Kawaja. And I don't say that lightly. You see, the world does not yet know who Peter Kawaja is or what he did. I had no idea. I had no idea he was fighting for all Desert Stormers like myself 5 years ago. I had no idea that he would lose his wife as a result of his desire to want to bring justice and not have tyranny in this world. I had no idea that he was fighting night and day, begging to get someone to listen to his story, that he was fighting the CIA and the FBI. And this man is truly a hero because he did not stop. And he is yet to get his reward. And he is yet to learn how America feels about him. He is yet to have the response from the Desert Stormers, because you see, they don't even know that Peter Kawaja exists. But you're going to hear a story tonight that you will not believe, and I can only say you are so fortunate for being here. I thank you for caring about America. I thank you for caring about our Desert Stormers, and I want to introduce to you the man who will really save America, Peter Kawaja.
Thank you. Sure hope I can live up to that. Thank you all for being here tonight. I just need a second or two to get settled. We've been a little disrupted in getting here. I'm actually working from some unusual notes, and most of my actual presentation that I normally have is a 90 total slide, but it didn't make it here. And I won't go into too much detail about that than to say that my gun didn't make it here originally. I believe the gentleman who's operating the overhead, Lieutenant Colonel Leslie Hobbs, can testify that he himself had to go back to the airport. I have to check my weapon when I fly, and when I got here, the weapon didn't make it. I filled out the claim report, and magically within 30 minutes they found the gun, but they wanted an address to deliver it. I kind of knew where that was going, and Les basically gave me, I hope I can call you that, sir, please. He gave me the address of the U.S. Army depot. And although they were willing to deliver it to the hotel, when I told them I wanted it delivered to the U.S. Army depot, they couldn't deliver it. The driver was not available. So through his kindness, he went back to the airport and picked it up for me. As we drove back from the airport, because he did come and get Joyce and myself, we were followed all the way from the airport to the hotel. We had to change hotels. As he can attest to this, that they changed lanes, did all kinds of stuff, and we've had a U.S. government tagged vehicle following us and a lot of other things. So if there are any federal agents in the audience, I can't see out. Welcome. I hope that you will learn something here that your superiors are not telling you, and I hope you can take it back. I hope you understand that what Joyce Riley had to say and what we're trying to say to you is not only that crimes have been committed against our military, but crimes are being committed right now against you. The Gulf War syndrome is a communicable disease, and it ends in death. That's the one thing I want to stride to you. And I'm going to show you some things. So, with that, let me move right along. War. By the way, I don't think, could you pull that down a little, shift it down, please? Yeah. There you go. War is big business. Sure is. You got to ask yourself, why have we fought all of these wars? Why is it that Americans are shedding their blood on foreign soil continually? And why is it that we're funding all of these wars? Okay. This is a letter that was read to the shareholders of U.S. Arms. If you don't know it, every president apparently becomes the CEO of U.S. Arms, which operates out of the Pentagon. So what we have is the United States of America and the president, who's supposed to promote peace, also being the CEO of the world's largest arms dealer. Now, if I can read that to you, you know, this sounds like an address to IBM. Let me read it to you. It says, strong growth in lean years is the hallmark of competitiveness, and U.S. Arms has had a very competitive year. Some shareholders were worried by my campaign promise to press for strong international limits on the dangerous and wasteful flow of weapons to troubled regions. But I assure you that I have held fast to the course set by former CEOs Ronald Reagan and George Bush. The end of the Cold War has caused a drop in both domestic and global arms demand. U.S. Arms has responded by spending shareholder money to develop export markets in Asia and the Middle East. As a result, our share of global conventional arms agreements rose from 17% in 1988 to 70% in 1993, and thanks to the efforts of our marketing team, the majority of our 1993 sales were to a promising new market, the developing world. In order to ensure stability, unelected governments and developing countries feel the need to acquire more arms. They do. And we are reaching out to them vigorously. Where we once catered to Cold War political allegiances, we now aggressively respond to supply and demand. With Russia, our major competitor, still severely crippled, we can look forward to several years of spectacular growth. Does Gulf War syndrome exist? Well, maybe you can talk to George Vaughan, who is an NSA, National Security Agent, who had an appointment with the First Lady Hillary Clinton on February the 23rd, 1995. Don't forget, this is an NSA intelligence agent. He was arrested on the steps of the White House and charged with being a threat to national security. He was not arrested by the DIA or the CIA, but by Major General Ronald R. Blank, the commanding officer of Walter Reed Hospital in Bethesda, Maryland. You need to understand, why would he be a threat to national security? Because you see, George Vaughan has Gulf War syndrome. It's communicable. And if he held his appointment with the First Lady and shook her hand and came into her presence, he would have passed the disease to her. Whilst the DOD and the VA says that it doesn't exist, they arrested a national security agent who is sick on the steps of the White House and charged him with being a threat to national security. These are the statistics. There were 697,000 active duty service members initially went to Desert Storm. And if you look at the figure, 489,400 have since separated from the military. 489,000 out of, let's say, 700,000. All right, so let's say run it out, 500,000 out of 700,000. Now look at this. These are from, by the way, from two different reports. One is where they're praising what they're doing. This is where they're kind of like telling you how they're treating people. Look at where it says up here, to date, the VA reports more than 489,400 veterans receive medical care. Now, they're not receiving any care, but what's happening is all 489,000 that left the military service went to the VA to try to get help, and they're not getting help. And what are they telling you? Well, it's only a few people that are sick, right? Okay. I'm really the wrong guy to be up here because, you see, I also enjoyed a normal relationship with the U.S. government. I'll give you a little background about me. I do a lot of things. I was trained with Navy SEALs to dive, and I have a lot of background with the U.S. military, played tennis with some of the bird colonels. I have a 28-year security career. I'm basically an investigative analyst and security consultant. I worked for defense contractors doing DOD, DOE work to Tempest specifications and DIAM 50.3, a lot of technical stuff. But basically, I engineered large, high security, high risk systems. My firm, the International Security Group, was even recommended worldwide by U.S. consulates. I'd receive recommendations. So I trained some of the officers that you saw on Geraldo Rivera, if you got that, Sons of Scarface, the DEA, FBI. So I used to walk in and out of police departments, out of law enforcement agencies, and had a pretty good relationship with the U.S. military until 1990, the Persian Gulf War. I'm going to give you an overview and read you just a couple of bulleted items, and then I'm going to tell you what happened to me. This will give you an idea. The saddest chapter of America's history is now being written. The people of America have yet to learn that indeed germ warfare was used on our servicemen and women during the Gulf War. And the greatest tragedy, it was a joint venture with the United States government. Chemical and biological germ warfare agents of mass destruction were made at Boca Raton, Florida, and Houston, Texas, by international terrorists working with U.S. intelligence. One of the special strains of hydrogen cyanide called Prussian Blue was being tested on gas mask filters at the Florida Product Ingredient Technology plant, PIT, for gas mask penetration over a year prior to the Gulf War. The PIT plant was financed and engineered by the same Dr. Barbuti, IBI, Ishan Barbuti International, builder of Pharma 150, chemical and biological weapons complex at Rabta, Libya. Former President George Bush, James Baker III, and John Deutsch, now CIA director, formerly on the Defense Science Board and chemistry professor at MIT, and issued a secret document in 1980 regarding chemical and biological weapons. They had financial interests in some of these companies which developed, sold, and transferred the weapons to Iraq. Yes, whilst being commander-in-chief, President Bush was arming Saddam Hussein with weapons of mass destruction. 2 years later, knowing that, but the American public did not, placed American forces in harm's way. Certain vaccines were grown 2 years in advance prior to the Gulf War. 2 years, I'm going to tell you about it. How did the United States government know what Iraq would use 2 years later, that they developed vaccines for it 2 years in advance? The pyridostigmine bromide PB pill that you've heard about, the nerve agent pretreatment pill, was not to counteract SOMAN, as stated by the DoD, but it was a counteractant for the nerve agent GF. The MSDS on GF originates at the U.S. Army Chemical and Biological Defense Command at Edgewood, R&D Engineering Center, Aberdeen Proving Grounds, Maryland. The U.S. has continually denied that GF was in Iraq's arsenal after the Gulf War. Yet the NBC logs, those are the nuclear, biological, and chemical logs from CENTCOM, Schwarzkopf's command, proves that the Israeli military police confirmed finding GF. The NBC logs also prove that Schwarzkopf was given the authority to use our own chemical and biological weapons. I can deliver Gulf War veterans who were involved in the shipment. James McAdams III, a U.S. attorney who covered up the CCCBNL, the Noriega case, was moved to West Palm Beach to cover up Iraqgate. Janet Reno was moved from Miami to Washington to become Attorney General. Those of you who haven't read Vote Scam, read it. She was also used to cover up Iraqgate. Reno appointed John Hogan counselor to investigate and present the BNL Task Force report on Iraqgate. In other words, does any crime exist, and does Gulf War syndrome exist? Mr. Hogan turns out to be an attorney who was also from Miami, where Janet Reno was, and who also represented the same terrorists, IBI, that the same United States government, I'm going to show you Department of Defense documents in a minute, secret documents, proves that IBI were international terrorists. The only major portion of the BNL Task Force report that is considered national security and blacked out is on IBI. The PIT plant was shut down after I exposed it at the Persian Gulf War, taken over by the RTC, and now occupied by Century Arms International, who flew the British flag over that building in the United Nations New World Order. Until I wrote and distributed a document about them. Check out their ties to CIA and British MI6. The VA hard files. What you need to know is that maybe you've heard of this before, but there are over 400,000 of those files that are missing. The VA hard files were the evidence on Gulf War illness. After the Persian Gulf War, the veterans that came back and started to get sick and go into the VA that we showed you up here, their hard files, which would prove everything that you need to know, were transferred to the Murrah building in Oklahoma and were accidentally, unfortunately, destroyed in the bombing. The DoD now claims that some of the NBC logs were also destroyed. Gulf War illness is a communicable disease spreading worse than AIDS by casual contact. It contains at least 40% of the HIV gene envelope. Your children can be infected at a playground or at school. Mycoplasma incognitus is only one of the Gulf War illnesses making up Gulf syndrome. It is a warfare agent by design. Our government is involved in this great crime and cover-up. A nationwide panic is going to be created of such magnitude that it will threaten our very existence. Soon you're going to see them acknowledge it. You're looking at the newspaper reports now, new action taking over in Iraq. We're looking to provoke a new war. You're reading about how Iraq is suddenly admitting to having biologicals. Then the next report comes out. You're looking at, oh gee, we didn't know they had them in their Scuds or the warheads. The next thing you're going to hear is from our newspapers, mainstream media who is covering up this. This isn't something that Saddam Hussein or we're just finding out. They've already known that. They control the information that you read and hear. And pretty soon what you have here is 1 million troops came back and they're carriers of a virus spreading to the civilian population. It's called population control. It's called getting rid of our military. There are over 300,000 UN troops stationed in the United States right now. Many more south of the border, many more in Canada, waiting.
There's more of us.
Yes, sir, and that's why we're here to talk to you about it. When they create this big, and why are they going to do this? What? Hello? Okay, are we all right? This happens when I do I apologize. Joyce Riley, she's my hero, as she is your hero. And Joyce Riley has been threatened as a result of having me when she did that radio show. Hello? When she did the radio show and addressed the letter to George Bush, a government asset approached the radio station to warn her, it isn't good to have Peter Kawaja in your building. They made other statements about that Peter Kawaja, that the Barbutis want Peter Kawaja dead. Really, it's the U.S. government that wants me dead. They intimated the building could be blown up. When Joyce Riley called, I believe it's Congressman Dornan, to ask for a congressional investigation based on my evidence. And I'm going to show you certain things. I have an actual suit, and everything I'm presenting to you tonight is evidence. I don't talk from conjecture. Senator Dornan took the information, hung up within 2 minutes. The National Security Agency called Joyce Riley, asked her the call letters of her radio station, who her station manager was not even interested that Americans were dying and many more were going to die. She asked him specifically, don't you care? All he wanted to know was, how many copies did they get all of Peter Kawaja's evidence? So I want you to know that I hold Joyce Riley in high regard because we are basically out here alone. It's Joyce Riley, the Nicholsons, and myself that is trying to bring you this information. Thank you. So let me continue. Thank you. Thank you. They're going to create this scare. And then the government will step in and they'll say, we got a solution. We've got the antidote. But only those of you who will accept the medical ID or national ID card will be allowed to be treated. All others will be considered a danger to society, hunted down, imprisoned, or killed. Americans will welcome this solution, will turn in their neighbors and friends in order to survive themselves. At the same time, this instrument will suspend the Constitution of the United States to allow the United Nations rule, New World Order, one world government. America will be enslaved. That is their plan. They have to get everyone to become a citizen of Washington, D.C. Those of you, I don't want to get into IRS issues and your 1040 forms and all of that. I'm sure all of you are acutely aware of many of the issues, but they've got to get you to accept that, and then they will legally be allowed to throughout the U.S. Constitution. It's happening before your very eyes. They're telling you that these diseases are spreading. They're getting ready right now to release information. And what they're saying is the Ebola and some of these diseases that you're seeing, the staph, the streptococcus, the flesh-eating disease, and the TB. Those are very, very, there are many outbreaks all over the United States, but the CDC is shutting it down. And they're telling you that a lot of these diseases are going to come to pass. They're not even denying that, but they're saying it's going to be because of international air travel, that they're bringing them back from Zaire, foreign places. Well, we've had international air travel for umpteen years now. So they're getting you ready. Get ready for it. Let me tell you my story. Because you haven't heard anything yet, I'm going to try and cut it down because I could talk for 6 months and you'd never know it all. But I'm going to try and keep it short. War. Boca plant begins trail to Washington. From Boca to Baghdad. Iraqis Florida plant tied to poison gas. How could it be? Did it really happen? What you're about to hear is both fictional as well as factual. The soldiers of the world, if able, would benefit from the ability to reduce the amount of equipment needed to survive in various warfare environments. This is the mission, such as nuclear, chemical, and biological attacks. The bulkiest of this equipment would be the MOP gear. This stands for Mission Oriented Protective Posture, or MOP. The 4 levels include a gas mask, footgear, gloves, and a bodysuit. Each article requires extensive maintenance and training to be used effectively. In some instances, however, the chemical being used may penetrate this line of defense. This is a real threat to the accomplishment of the mission if troops cannot operate in certain environments. All an opposing force would have to do to deny terrain or equipment from capture is spray it with one of these chemicals to make it useless and inaccessible to less prepared troops. Therefore, an internal protection or antidote would be highly advantageous. If this antidote is used in combination with an agent that will penetrate all other defenses the enemy has, it can also be used effectively as an offensive weapon. Attacks with this agent followed by an attack of prepared troops unhampered by extra gear into affected areas would ensure victory in all circumstances. If an enemy were to be attacked, simply line up prepared troops in the usual gear instead of the MOP gear on the border of the soon-to-be invaded territory and send aircraft to spray the areas ahead with a penetrating agent. Have any of you seen any planes or heard of what we call dusting, the testing of that? It happens in the United States. They have conducted tests here initially before the war with Iraq, and they still continue. To enable this to happen, research and development of new technology would have to be done. This experimentation, while having a beneficial outcome for soldiers in the end, would lead to quite hazardous conditions for those in trial runs. As has been said, this story is fictional and factual. All that remains to be done to make this scenario a reality is for the governments of the world to admit what has already happened to troops on the very recent battlefields of the world in the Persian Gulf War. In 1988, I was approached to do a project called Product Ingredient Technology, PIT, in Boca Raton, Florida. Several years later, after the smoke cleared, I found that the company that steered me through the project was a CIA-based company. I didn't know it at the time. It was supposed to manufacture an all-natural cherry flavoring additive for human consumption. However, they had a budget of $1 million for security for the plant. They needed a very high-risk security system. And it wasn't what you would call a burglar alarm system. It was designed for surveillance of the employees and to keep materials tracking. I then found out that the financier of the project and the architect of the plant was none other than IBI, Ishan Barbuti, builder of the chemical weapons plant in Libya. I was then asked, after being contracted, to install a cyanide detection system, specifically a hydrogen cyanide detection system. The red flags went up. This document, although not within the same year, was sent to me prior to it even being released in the Tampa Tribune, and I received that long before it was ever published, that the US military was trying to procure new weapons of mass destruction. If you look down at here, it says, where there's a talk about George Bush wants to destroy our supply. President Bush said that he wants to ban chemical weapons, but he also wants to modernize the US chemical weapons arsenal until there is a global ban. This is a letter from the CIA in 1988, unbeknownst to me. I didn't know about a person called Moshe Tal, but this is a letter regarding Dr. Barbuti. And what you need to know is that what this represents is illegal CIA covert activity taking place in the United States of America because they're not allowed to conduct activities in the United States. Guess on who? Dr. Barbuti. What they were using Moshe Tal for was information. They dropped with Moshe Tal in 88, the end of 88, and they picked up with me in 89. I didn't understand at the time what was really happening. But it shows the United States government knows who Dr. Barbuti was. This is a part of a larger article. It was done, Iraqi-owned firm probed in military intelligence case, because in fact the United States military intervened in what they called the TK7 lawsuit regarding none other than IBI. This is very complicated. It has to do with fuel additives, has to do with Gerald Bull and the supergun, has to do with biological and chemical weapons. This is a Department of Defense document. Again, none other. It's on the Iraqi businessman Ishan Barbuti. Of course, they have blacked out certain parts of this by procuring chemicals for the Libyans. So the United States, this is an intelligence document, the United States government had this information many years, since 1985, by the way. This is another DOD document, which shows again the same Barbuti. Individuals associated with biological warfare. And they name two countries, Libya and Iraq. more on Dr. Barbuti. We could go on, and I have many documents. As I said, my normal presentation is about 90 of these documents. But what I want you to understand is that it isn't like they didn't know. Now, many incidents took place, and I'm gonna cut to the quick because I don't want to keep you sitting there. There's a lot to know of what happened to me. But I then, like the goody two-shoes American that I am, ran to the CIA, FBI, and U.S. Customs. When I found out what was going on, I said, oh, I have the scoop of the century. I mean, I've uncovered terrorists operating in America. And stupid me. So they made me an operative. I operated for the United States government, which is one of the reasons why I have the evidence I have, because I operated for them under a code name. I agreed to do that. They said that these people were international terrorists and that they were going to prosecute them. Well, they were right about one thing. They were international terrorists, but they weren't going to prosecute them. What they were looking for was to control the leak. If I was in charge of security for the PIT plant and for IBI, and what you need to know is now we come to the tie of what Joyce Riley and the doctors Nicholson talk about. You see, the headquarters for IBI was not in Florida. The PIT plant was, because of the ports of Florida and their other things. But the headquarters was at 777 Post Oak Boulevard, Houston, Texas. Throughout Texas and Oklahoma, the Barbutis operated to include a facility at Big Spring. If you haven't seen the movie Hangar 18, you need to look at that movie. That's the site that it was. And because I'm going to skip over a lot of material, I won't be able to expound on what the significance of a lot of that is. But no one told me, the government, didn't tell me, didn't give me a handbook and say, you're allowed to do this and you're allowed to do that. I considered terrorists operating in the United States serious business. I took it upon myself to bug telephones, rewire telephone equipment, bug buildings, and use body mics and a lot of other things. People such as Henry Kissinger is involved, Dan Mica, Congressman Dan Mica, who's no longer a congressman. I made many recordings of CIA, FBI, U.S. Customs, counterintelligence agents, politicians, lobbyists, members of Congress, all the way up to the president. I did not record. I would like to say for record, I would not be stupid enough to even say that on the mic that I recorded the president. Someone has said I may have been in possession of tape recordings of George Bush. If I have any recordings like that, they weren't made by me. They could have been made by people in the White House or people who did not agree with such tyranny against Americans. However, I do have evidence and calls from London, USA, and Baghdad and foreign nations. And I'm going to show you some of that up here, that it's referred to in even depositions regarding federal agents. So I became very, very concerned because at the same time that my government was telling me that these people were terrorists, at the same time that I was working in the R&D section, I had complete control. I carried a gun. I was in charge of security for IBI and PIT. I basically also was conducting intelligence for America, so I thought, actually I was, whether I was doing it for the government, I was doing it for you. And I just was appalled that everything that they were doing was just poisons. Everything had to do with death. Here was a food processing plant, and everything had to do with the word death. I'd run back to my office and at 2, 3 in the morning, and I'd flip through the pages, and everything would be under my hazmat books. It would be death, death, death. I was very concerned. So concerned when I found that they were conducting tests on gas mask filters. Now, you got to understand, Iraq is our friend. Saddam Hussein was not our enemy in 1989. In fact, Iran was our enemy, so the government tells us. It's amazing, they tell us 1 minute that the Russians are our enemy, then the next thing you see. And if any of you would have gone to Russia, or befriended a Russian or given money to a Russia, you could have been arrested for treason or something like that. But Bill Clinton, the President of the United States, not only 1 minute, you know, the Russians are an enemy, now they're our friends. He's shaking hands, they're dining together, and we're giving our tax dollars to the Russians. And they got billions. They got a lot of money in Russia that you don't know. They're the richest ore and mining and diamonds and a lot of things over in Russia. But this again has to do with the New World Order. It's very lengthy to explain, but it's just amazing to me. So I eventually sent a Federal Express package to the National Security Agency. I refused to believe. Now, many events took place prior to this, because I'm jumping right away from 1989 to right up to 1990. And people like Dan Micah is in attendance. I'll give you an example with Haidar Barbuti, the son of Dr. Barbuti. Now, here you go. Dr. Barbuti, by the way, operated out of Sloane Avenue in London, England. And Haidar Barbuti, a 24-year-old son, came to the United States under a student visa. He bought the bodyguard I provided for him. All of my bodyguards and investigators were non-veterans. I only deal predominantly with non-veterans and now Gulf War veterans. But he bought a $56,000 cash Jag Daimler. He didn't have a driver's license, so his bodyguard could drive him around in style. He bought the acting vice president of IBI in Texas a $96,000 cigarette boat, one of those cigar boats, cash. The person named it Trust Me, although he started to pull some stunts on the Barbutis. So many things took place, and at one of these meetings, and there were multiple meetings where dignitaries came to Florida, people from outside of the country, people from Washington, D.C. I also bugged the phone lines in the building at the PIT corporate offices where some of these people stayed. And that is how I acquired a lot of information. Dan Micah is in attendance when Haidar Barbuti states that they are going to dump the cyanide into the water supplies of the United States and refers to the cyanide as sayonara. When congressmen are laughing, and I'm going to show you documents that proves that in fact cyanide was dumped into the water supplies of the United States in certain areas, and people are dying from that alone. Just a minute. This document, by the way, is the Federal Express package that I sent to the National Security Agency 2 weeks before the war with Iraq, wherein I warned of Iraqi intelligence operating in the United States and in close proximity to a classified military project. And then I asked 2 deadly questions, deadly for me. 1, is our military in a joint venture with IBI to develop chemical and biological weapons for the U.S.? And 2, does the President know? Those of you who know George Bush, being charged with the October surprise and many other crimes, he stated, I was left out of the loop. I wanted to ask the question. I had my answers, I knew my answers, but I couldn't believe that everybody was involved. With that, the war with Iraq took place. 8 federal agents armed with automatic weapons paid a visit to me. I was sequestered under armed guard for 4 hours. I was not allowed to view the search. I was threatened. They came with a search warrant approved by President Bush under the International Emergency Economic War Powers Act. You better believe that they used a War Powers Act on an American. They came and took the evidence, not against foreign terrorists. They took the evidence so that you, America, wouldn't know what was going to take place in the Persian Gulf War. They sealed it under national security. It is still sealed as national security today. That is the affidavit for search. You see the statutes that they quote? And notice they referred to see attachment A, see attached affidavit. All I saw was weapons pointed at me. I didn't see any of this. I was not even shown the search warrant. At the end, they handed me one single sheet of paper. I never even saw this is the application for the search under the War Powers Act. Okay? I won't go into this too much, but those of you already who know that the firm of Hill and Knowlton was used. President Bush decided to wage a war with Iraq and used a public relations firm to get Americans to hate Iraqis. And this document in TV Guide of February 22, 1992, and a lot of these documents, by the way, if you contact the American Gulf War Veterans Association, you can get copies of some of this stuff. We will send you packages of information. And what we're showing you here tonight is just the tip of the iceberg. We got all kinds of documents. For Janet Reno and Louis Freeh, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Nothing is at my home. Don't come again, or you're going to get a different surprise. Yeah, I think this time I'll be ready for him. Yeah. But what they told you, what George Bush told you, and what these things prove is that, in fact, they rehearsed and staged and spent millions of dollars and lied to you, telling you that the Iraqis were ripping the life support systems of the babies in the hospitals in Kuwait and all of these things. This shows you all the evidence of why it really didn't take place, and it was basically a PR project to sell you and get Americans all mad, and let's go over there and kick butt. Let's go get them because these are bad guys. Okay. This is a document that regarding IBI. And this is from the Assistant Attorney General at the time, that they held grand juries regarding Ishan Barghouti. And I appeared at and was subpoenaed to several grand juries for the United States as the star witness for the United States government. So what you need to understand is, as I'm telling you, as I have told you, the documentation that I supply is actual factual information. And even though they took evidence from me, they said, okay, we're going to prosecute him. I said, okay, I'll agree. I'll testify. I appeared before federal grand juries supposedly to indict the terrorists. But what these grand juries were for was to find out, did they miss anything else? It wasn't on the Barghoutis. It was to find out what all they had missed. And I'll explain to you more about that. So this is another grand jury relating to Haidar Barghouti, but they compelled me. In other words, the United States government compelled me. Could you put that prior document back up? I mean, I want you to understand the significance of some of the stuff you're seeing is that the Assistant U.S. Attorney, for an order, look down in the middle, for an order pursuant to these codes requiring Peter Kawaja, they wanted an order to require me to give testimony. Okay? Thank you. And that basically is another subpoena. That's the actual subpoena for the grand jury, where they say don't disclose the existence of this, this document. Now, this is the motion to seal. What they did was they came and took the evidence and sealed it as national security. Nobody has been indicted or prosecuted till today. No one. They will never do it, because it isn't that the Barghoutis were operating in the United States in a covert manner. In fact, when I appeared on ABC Nightline with Ted Koppel and the ABC Joint Financial Times expose, I tried to do an expose in 1991. Moshe Tal stated that when he was asked a question, how come the plant was open? How come they got away with this? How did this happen in America? I mean, how could this happen? He stated Barghouti has friends in Washington. In fact, Dr. Barghouti was supposedly assassinated by agents of Saddam Hussein in July of 1990, supposedly. That's the second time he died. He died in 1969. And he's buried in London, England. He's not a citizen. He's buried in London, England, under 4 feet of poured cement, and on top of that is a 4-foot marble structure, supposedly a religious monument, which prevents his body from being exhumed. The Interpol agent who identified him has disappeared. In other words, you know, saying, yeah, that's him, he's dead. He's disappeared. Okay? However, in 1991, when I did the Financial Times ABC joint venture expose, where ABC had 30 investigative reporters around the world checking out my information, they did a limited expose. I believe they were on a fishing trip to find out again what I know. And they did a very limited expose. When I asked, why didn't you really tell the story to America? Because Gulf War veterans were sick and dying. The reply was, we don't want to topple the entire United States government. ABC knew back then the scope of what this was. Okay? So this is where they seal it. Now, it's very important that you look at the words, because words, as many of you know, dealing with the IRS and dealing with the government, bottom line, and with the laws we operate under, words, every word means something. Until the subject investigation, they're going to seal it, they say, until the subject investigation is completed. Okay? Thank you. Well, I lived. They didn't count on that I would live. Seem to be missing something, but I'll go on. I received a telephone call after doing the ABC expose. After John Hines, Senator Hines, made a statement on CNN stating that the orders to sell some of the stuff from Saddam Hussein came from the White House. When I did the expose, I received a threat from the Pentagon, which came by the way of Dave McMichaels, who was later stabbed in a multiple wound stabbing. And it was a threat, tell Peter Kawaja, if he comes forward with any information, we will deny. If he can prove anything, credible witnesses have already been arranged to testify against him, and then they issued a specific threat against me. John Scheibel, on the subcommittee investigating the arming of Iraq, called me. He asked me one question. Who are you more afraid of, George Bush or Saddam Hussein? I said, George Bush. He said, don't try him in the media. Click, the phone went dead. Within 3 months, my wife was dead. She died a horrible death that I won't have time to tell you tonight, and I don't want to interrupt it with tears. I'm not so strong that I can make the presentation and go into it. But that is why I have taken up the cause and will not stop for Gulf War veterans, because they're going to die. Many of them, not all, will die the same way, but it will manifest itself in a type of Ebola, where you will bleed, you will die from all forms of cancer, and you will bleed through all parts of your body. I filed a suit. I lived. Not that they didn't try to kill me, and for me to recount, and I don't have the documents to put up on the screen with me here at this meeting. But I was hospitalized under one time when they shot something into me. I still have, my toenails are still white. Those of you who know about cyanide poisoning and certain types of poisoning, what happens to your nails. I lived because there were certain intelligence agents that came to the hospital and guarded the hospital. I was 7 days with an IV in my arm. They changed the bags every 4 hours of special antibiotics. certain Israeli intelligence people came there, cut hair samples from my head, and ran DNA testing. There were certain things that were done. Apparently, I ended up having an immense amount of doctors, I was told. And every 4 hours, they changed the IV bag with something. I don't know what it is. And they had to keep flushing the saline. I don't know if any of you have ever been in that position where you've had something stuck in your arm that long, but the blood wants to clot and heal around it. And the rush you get and the burning, it's not fun laying in the hospital without your gun, knowing that somebody wants you dead. And I was not even allowed to suck an ice cube, much less drink any water. But I lived. Many things that happened to me that we won't go into tonight, and 4 years later, I filed a suit against the federal agents. Now, I couldn't bring suit against George Bush directly up front because they used the Internal Revenue Service, the IRS, which many of you know is not affiliated with the United States government. And they used the IRS and the California Federal Bank. The IRS was used to file illegal liens, which I've proven against me. They shut down my business, threatened all of my employees. The California Federal Bank is foreclosing on my home. They're determined to keep me broke so that I can't fight them. However, I filed a suit against some of the agents, and it costs money to fight the government. One attorney I went to said it'll cost you $300,000 up front to start it, and even if you win, you lose. So I am fighting them on my own. The suit is being handled by myself. And I named the first couple of agents. There are 8 other agents, such as CIA agent Charles Dawson, who knows about it, so I'm naming names. Trevor Armbruster, the senior editor of Reader's Digest, who arranged for me to be flown and landed on the steps of the White House and delivered to James Baker. Trevor Armbruster of Reader's Digest is a CIA asset. I was told, all you got to do, though, is bring all the originals. I didn't. Federal agent Mark Oden is a terrorist and a traitor to America. Agent Jack Bigler of Houston, Texas. Martin Schramm of Houston, Texas. They're terrorists and traitors to America. They sold America out because, in fact, they sealed the evidence. They had evidence in 1990 before the Persian Gulf War. They knew what was going to take place in the war. The actual affidavit that the federal agents swore out, they presented evidence proving that the gas masks were being tested, what Barboudi's involvement was, that the cyanide and the PIT plant was cloned in Iraq on a larger scale. They knew about the Houston operations, they knew about biologicals, and that is how that gas mask, by the way, if you break down the filters, then you have 700,000 troops out there that think they're being protected by their gas masks, and they weren't. If you play the CNN tapes during the Persian Gulf War, President Bush was asked a question, why is it that we don't change our gas masks that our troops have to the quick change gas mask filters that the other coalition forces had? Well, what you didn't know was that George Bush did know, was that it doesn't matter if you have a 10-second filter change or a 30-minute filter change, you're going to get it. It doesn't matter. And he knew it. So that was my complaint. Sorry. Yeah, let me read it. I filed a suit against some of the federal agents, and this is their response. They came back with a motion to dismiss. Listen to why. But listen to also what they state. That certain criminal investigation is ongoing and is centered around persons involved in the manufacture and shipment of lethal and illegal chemicals to be used by terrorist nations against the United States. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Whoa, that's not what the DOD and VA says. They said nothing happened. Now, what is the significance of every piece of paper? I want you to pay attention to everything you get from the IRS and the government. Number one, if you remember the motion to seal, they said that they're going to seal the evidence until the investigation is over. 4 years later, after filing motions to unseal, renewed motions, emergency renewed motions, and emergency motions, whatever I went through the hoop to get it, but I got the affidavit, not the evidence. I got it unsealed. What does that mean? They could only unseal it when the investigation is over. What have they done here is but committed perjury, because they are now stating, when I filed my response after I got the affidavit unsealed, they're stating that there is an ongoing investigation. That is a lie. There is no ongoing investigation. But they want the judge to throw my case out against these federal agents. Okay, let's do the next one. Listen to why. Through the civil litigation, plaintiff apparently wants to direct the course of the criminal investigation. Rather, the AUSA, that's the Assistant U.S. Attorney, and the agents should be permitted to continue their investigation into these important matters without the constraint or pressure of this litigation. Aw, poor babies, they can't take me suing them. Shame. Particularly where the complaint cannot survive the basic principles of pleading. The complainant in this case fails to state a claim upon which any relief may be obtained. Yeah, they can't ever pay me back for what they did to me, for the terrorism they conducted against me and my wife. The asserted, the complaint, the ASA is protected by absolute immunity. Who says? Just because they say? And the agents are protected by qualified immunity. The asserted claims of misconduct, like Waco, misconduct. I call it misconduct on the bottom. It's called treason and war crimes. That's misconduct. Should not be permitted to overcome that privilege. So they want to dismiss my complaint based on that. They have never, to this date, since 1994, ever filed a response to my evidence that I filed. They cannot deny the charges I brought against them, and here's my response. This is me, the plaintiff. For the first time, what you have is, instead of federal agents charging somebody, I'm charging federal agents. I'm going to nail them to the wall for you. Plaintiff, for every Gulf War veterans, for you, for what happened at Waco and Ruby Ridge. And by the way, the common tie, you know, I don't know if those of you who know Linda Thompson, but the common tie at Waco, Canada, Switzerland, the World Trade Center bombing, Persian Gulf War, wasn't CS, cyanide. The only supply of the natural cyanide. Now the judge, if you read the documents in the World Trade Center bombing, the judge there said that they made mention of that the bomb was so powerful it blew away the sodium cyanide that was on top of the bombs, the canisters. And in fact, it was because the bomb was so powerful that the cyanide did not vaporize. Had it vaporized, it would have made the Oklahoma bombing look like, you know, like a joke, because in fact it would have killed 100,000 people. So what you got to ask yourself is, do the terrorists operate independently in the United States, or do they have control of the process? And if not, is it the United States government that has control of the process, or the people that purport themselves to be representing the people of America? If they do, who's using cyanide to kill people around the world? Okay. This is my response. The affidavit and subsequent search was illegal, purposely misrepresented to the magistrate, not for the purposes of obtaining evidence to be used in any legitimate criminal indictment or prosecution, for the purposes of removing evidence to conceal it from the people of America so as not to embarrass the Bush administration, to withhold and conceal evidence critical to the BNL investigations. The BNL is that Banco del Nacional Lavoro, that's the CCZ-BNL. Your $5 billion went to Iraq, supposedly for loan on grain, which they used to buy weapons to kill Americans. To withhold evidence and concealed evidence which proves Iraq-gate or Gulf War illness. To punish the plaintiff for exposing crimes of federal agents. To conceal U.S. government dealings with terrorists and terrorist nations, and which same terrorists the Bush administration had now declared war against. To conceal from the American public and for American forces and their families who are knowingly placed in harm's way that the same terrorist nations the Bush administration had declared war against had acquired new weapons of mass destruction from the United States, which American forces could not defend against. to conceal evidence of terrorist activities against the American people, the civilian population, with the government's agent knowledge. What you need to know is, I don't have that slide to put up here, but there was a plot to destroy 4 U.S. nuclear facilities to make them go into same-day meltdown. Now, on CNN, they aired during the Persian Gulf War, President Bush made a statement. I believe it was President Bush anyway, but the White House issued a statement that security at U.S. nuclear reactors were heightened during the Persian Gulf War. And that went like this, right over everybody's head. What no one asked was, if we took the war to Iraq, how come the U.S. government worried about the destruction of nuclear facilities? In fact, the tape recordings that I made of terrorists and the statements I made earlier to you about poisoning the water supplies was part of that plan, and in fact all the civilian population of the United States was deliberately or placed in harm's way. And only because of issuing a public statement on the air, it was called a bluff. There was Saddam Hussein and George Bush were sending messages back and forth. Excuse me. And it was never pulled off, but in fact, if one nuclear power plant went into meltdown in the United States, what you heard about Chernobyl in Russia going down, that was just a partial. A real meltdown would be disastrous to the entire population of the United States and Canada. To conceal evidence of terrorist activities against the American civilian population, plaintiff will prove violations of First and Fourth Amendment rights, false statements within a government agency, imparting false information, war crimes, concealment, conspiracy, corruption of government employees, aiding and abetting, accessory after the fact, fraud, misprison of a felony, misleading a federal grand jury, obstruction of justice, tampering with a witness, threatening a federal witness, retaliating against a witness, defrauding America, obstruction of justice, misfeasance, malfeasance, perjury, and treason. Now, in fact, I'm going to nail them to the wall. Okay. I appeared, you see what, the government has a little bit of a problem with me because, you see, they called me as their star witness years back. They never thought I'd survive today. But they called me as their star witness, supposedly, to prosecute the terrorists. Well, guess what? I agree they're terrorists, and I agree that the evidence exists. Their affidavit for search proved they supplied all kinds of documents saying, oh, all these bad things are happening. We've got to go get this guy's evidence. And this guy, Peter Kawaja's got all this evidence that we could use to prosecute people. They took it. They admit they took it. Nobody was ever indicted or prosecuted. When I attempted to bring to the grand jurors evidence of U.S. intelligence and CIA involvement in what was happening with the Gulf War, the U.S. attorney shut down the grand jury and dismissed me, and I was threatened by FinCEN. You know who FinCEN is? Agents inside of a federal building. To date, no one has ever been indicted or prosecuted. So they have a big problem with me because, you see, they made me their star. And they said my evidence was credible because they came with a War Powers Act search warrant and affidavit. They got a real big problem now because, you see, they never used the evidence to do anything about it. And that is why my case is important to you and to all Americans and Gulf War veterans, because I'm getting ready to nail them, and they're trying to get my case thrown out, because if they get it thrown out, the evidence, which is national security, you'll never see it, but you'll get to hear nice, juicy details. You think the O.J. trial is anything. You're going to hear all kinds of recordings of politicians and people on there committing crimes. You're going to see documents. You're going to see real evidence of the crime. Oh, no, let's leave that up there. This is an example, by the way, of in a deposition. Here's a deposition of Don Clay, where he says, did they indicate the source of information? He says, no, I know that the original source came from Peter Kawaja, okay? And he had provided them with tapes. Let's skip over there to the FBI, and they ask here, okay, whose voices? Was it Gordon Liddy's voice? They call my guys commandos. I call them Americans. I call them non-veterans. I call us patriots. Patriots, that's who we are. So, thanks. The guys appreciate it, and vets appreciate it. They go here that they existed. Okay, now look at this. The A15, nobody discussed any of the details of the tapes other than the fact that they existed. And Peter turned them over to government agents. There were conversations between Hyder Barghouti that Hyder had some contact in Iraq. Yeah, I know who the contact was. Okay, so what does that prove? They can't have an 18-minute tape gap, and they can't say they don't know the tapes exist. Now, I only want to bring this. This has nothing to do with Gulf War illness, but this article came out about cyanide. I want to bring up something about cyanide. Right here in the green, it says cyanide can be fatal in concentrations above 2 parts per million. Lower doses ingested over a period of time can cause mental retardation. All right, I only needed to put that up there to show you. Can we switch now? To show you what they're claiming. Now, this is finally I've gotten somebody to put it on paper. Now, that was just an article written because of a spill from a diamond mine in Guyana. And it's not related other than that somebody finally put some numbers down. Why is that important? Look at this letter from the city of Boca Raton, where the PIT plant was. You see, the city of Boca Raton, when the RTC confiscated the building, when I exposed it, went in and poured cement down the drains. Why did they do that? Because they know they got a big liability problem, because federal agents sealed the document which proves, again, that they were dumping cyanide, warfare grade, what's called free cyanide, the most potent of all cyanide, not diluted concentrations, into the water supplies. And I've been receiving calls from people living and working south of the PIT plant, and calls from their wives and people that are in hospitals, brain dead and dying of cancer. IBM, who is located south of, if any of you know where Boca Raton is, Yamada Road, IBM has recently moved. It is occupied by a pharmaceutical company, all of the massive buildings that IBM had back there. So we got a little problem here, because the city of Boca, I issued a document when I unsealed the affidavit. It proves that federal agents knew in 1990 that they were dumping because they were running tests. See, they were producing, supposedly, they were to manufacture 100 tons of cyanide. Now, that's not the cyanide that was used against our troops in Desert Storm, but that's where the testing of the Prussian blue against the gas mask filters, and that's its significance. So where did the 100 tons go? If it went down the drain, if you're understanding what's happening here, this is from the city of Boca Raton to me when I issued a document to them saying, hey, you better do something about your water and check it out. They said here, according to the EPA, that they regularly check their water for cyanide. Guess what? I had a certain Gulf War veteran myself check with the EPA. There's no such requirement for a water treatment plant. If there is now in the books, check your water treatment plant if you got one here. Say, you know, let's see it on paper that you're required to check for specifically cyanide. They don't. And they go here. Did you see the interview with John Deutsch, the CIA director, not the recent 60 Minutes, but the prior one, where they were asking him about Desert Storm and Gulf War illness, and he goes, we've never seen, you ever hear those words? We've never seen any widespread use of chemical and biological weapons. Anybody that uses that, that's a tip-off right away there to government. Look at what these people say here. We have never seen any indication of potential cyanide problems. They held up the glass of water and they go, we've never seen. I asked them to specifically provide me with the tests of the water. They did not. Now look at this other document. Here's the tip-off. This is a letter from the EPA to Connie Mack regarding information from Jim Brown and Peter Kawaja about cyanide at the PIT plant dumped down the drains. This matter falls under the Department of the Treasury, U.S. Customs in Washington, D.C. What a crock of, if I need my boots to walk in here. When is dumping warfare-grade cyanide into a water supply a matter for U.S. Customs? It is a matter for U.S. Customs because the shipment, import-export of illegal chemical and biologicals comes under Customs, who have been covering up for the CIA and the U.S. government, and they transferred the case, the EPA, instead of doing something about it, to U.S. Customs. I just wanted to point out something about AIDS, which a lot of people know. Condoms, I really didn't, this got in here somehow out of sequence, but it's okay. Kind of gives you an idea of the smallest size of naturally occurring holes in latex condoms. It's 5 microns in diameter. The AIDS virus is 0.1, which means that using a condom doesn't stop the transmission of AIDS. And that is significant simply because the Gulf syndromes and these bacteria are transmitted easier than AIDS and contain part of the HIV envelope. Now, you've been reading some of these, this is an article that appeared in USA Today. And why is it significant? I mentioned the staph, the strep. Have you heard of the outbreaks in Minnesota and many other places where it eats you, it actually eats your body, and TB? Many of these diseases are a result of the breakdown of the immune system and part of the dusting program and from the Gulf War syndrome. It is manifesting itself in different ways. But look at what they state over here. Down there it says that they're going to destroy the refrigerated trucks that have been picking up the dead bodies. Do they destroy the morgue when you put a dead body in there? If you die because of heat, there's no reason to destroy anything. They're going to destroy the trucks because what they're doing is picking up contagious bodies. They're going to have to destroy the evidence, and that's what the significance of that is. Be careful. What I'm saying to you is that you're going to see healthcare is going to be, it is, forget about being on a political agenda, but that is how they're scaring you and why they're bringing it up. Medical treatment. You see, how can they control America? How can the United Nations really take over? They can if you've got diseases that you can't cure, and if you can't get treatment because you are an outcast and you've got to hide in the hills because you don't get the medical ID card, you're in big trouble. Okay? This is a document from the Inspector General of the Department of Defense. And now you're starting to see Hillary Clinton, the First Lady, come forward and going, maybe there's something to Gulf War illness. You see, Hillary Clinton has a person in her office now called Dr. Diana Zuckerman, who has a big file of evidence that I sent to Diana Zuckerman. The First Lady and President Clinton knows about it, but we know who runs the White House, don't we? And so President Clinton, because of Hillary Clinton, sent some evidence regarding chemical warfare. Actually, it's chemical and biological, but that's their terms. And the Department of Defense has actually opened a case under my name. I'm told that is highly unusual. But you see, they have no choice but to open a case because I am going to prove it. And so what they're trying to do is buy time because I was offered some sort of major deal and I've been tried to be bought off. So they're trying to dismiss my suit. Don't let the evidence be unfolded. Let it be national security. Let us take care of it, Peter. We're going to investigate this for you. Okay? The case number which exists is 95L59724. It is a tiny slide exhibit that I put up with all kinds of evidence, including the NBC logs, which I put up on a wall. Unrefutable evidence, because the evidence I put up are mostly 90% of my evidence that I'm prosecuting federal agents and Gulf War illness is government. CIA, DOD, Defense Intelligence Agency, U.S. military secret documents. Okay? I'd like to read you a letter from a Gulf War veteran, specifically a Gulf War veteran's wife, before I close. And I want you to know that I also received a letter from Dr. Garth Nicholson prior to coming here, because I asked him some very pertinent questions, because a lot of people have heard them on the radios programs, and they are, you know, they're doctors, and they've got to watch what they say, because the VA has tried. Imagine this: the VA itself has tried to sue the doctors for malpractice. In other words, it's claiming they're practicing medicine without a license. That's the VA. Whilst the DOD says it doesn't exist, the VA says it doesn't exist. Hey, if doctors want to spend their money and want to help Americans, why are armed defense intelligence agents walking into the MD Anderson Cancer Center and threatening the administration not to allow the doctors to proceed? Okay, so I asked them some questions because they've got to lighten it. They take a narrow look at it, and they don't want to scare America. Now, I don't want to scare America, but I want you to understand something, that it isn't rashes. Hundreds of thousands of people. We killed 500,000 Iraqis. 250,000 Iraqis are dead because of the disease. 1 million more are dying. In every nation around the world, we have people in the hundreds of thousands that are dying. Americans in the hundreds of thousands are dying. I don't have time. I won't keep you here to tell you, and I don't have the documents to put up there to show you about Gulf War veterans all over and their spouses and the kids. And by the way, there are several. I didn't get into the testing of what happened. It wasn't Saddam Hussein only. This is not about Saddam Hussein. What you need to understand is we didn't just sell him biologicals. The testing that was done on our troops in the Persian Gulf War was by our U.S. military, was to infect our own troops so that they would come back to the United States and infect the rest of the population. That is why we amassed 700,000 troops initially there, sent another 300,000, and now we're sending back. We're creating another stir. What you need to know is the microbes live for 7 years. So if you touch any of the weapons or you go over to the Persian Gulf, they're dying by the hundreds of thousands. So it's very sinister. The tests, one of the tests that Joyce Riley told you about, she mentioned the golden har. Golden har and the Gulf babies born deformed is a specific type of a test. There were multiple. Let me tell you how they are playing God and how sinister this is. Dr. Joshua Lederberg, who won the Nobel Prize, I believe, in 1988, working on the Human Genome Project, DHEA, and an anaerobic cell. That is the ability, the United States government is looking for the ability to design a super soldier. If you saw the movie Universal Soldier with Jean-Claude Van Damme, that gives you an idea. These movies are made, they all have some sort of truth to it, they're very elaborate. But just as a lizard, you cut its tail off and it grows back, it's the ability to heal yourself. What they did was reverse engineer human beings. Now, can you imagine if the media got hold of babies being born with 5 arms? I think they'd have no choice but to put that over the airwaves. But instead, they're making babies being born without 1 eye, without 1 limb specifically. If you can control a human being to make them be born without something, you can make them be born with. Okay? There was a project on TV that came out. I just need to mention it real quick. I thought I had it here. But specifically, they were mentioning those types of tests. But I guess I don't happen to have that paper handy. So Dr. Nicholson responded to me because I wanted to know something from him. Because don't forget, the Gulf War illness, mycoplasma, that he and Dr. Nancy Nicholson have isolated as one. As Joyce Riley showed you, many biologicals were used, but the pyridostigmine bromide pill was one other test, and the plasma from Abe and First Flight, 2 horses that were pastured in Minnesota under the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Horses, yeah. The Joint Chiefs of Staff became ranchers, and they were shooting them up with botulinum to where they could take a hot toxin capable of killing 1,000 horses, 1 dose. They eventually transferred them to Fort Detrick, Maryland, which is where, and they increased the herd size, and this is documented again evidence, which is where they got the plasma. Now that is a specific culture grown in advance 2 years, because you don't shoot up horses today and tomorrow you got what you need. It took them a long time to build up a minimum of 100 horses, and then they could start making the plasma. But that's where they got the vaccines for a specific weapon. We instigated a war with Iraq. We knew what we shipped them. We knew what they would use. We knew also some of the things we were going to test. We knew what vaccines we needed to have in order to counter certain things that were going to be delivered. We also had the Prussian blue, so that the gas mask filters were rendered useless. It was deliberate, and it is criminal. It is called a war crime, and it is called treason against America. Dr. Garth Nicholson has responded to me in writing because they have softened the blow because they have no choice. But this is his response in some direct questions. I have not changed my position that Gulf War illness, in some cases, kill. Colonel Larry Klein, USAF, died 2 weeks ago, and he tested positive for Mycoplasma fermentans, or incognitus. I do not believe that anyone who has a severe Mycoplasma infection is ever completely cured of the disease. Now it's very lengthy what he wrote to me. This is from the MD Anderson Cancer Center. But bottom line is, I'd like to make sure you understand something Joyce Riley said to you. They haven't found a cure. They found a treatment. If you are diagnosed early enough and you use the doxycycline Cipro, maybe it does go away permanently. What Dr. Nicholson says is, if you don't, you live with it the rest of your life. What you're really doing is treating it. It reoccurs until your immune system cannot handle it, and you die. It is being spread by casual contact, by perspiration. I can give you stories, and I have a video to show, if you're interested in obtaining that, of veterans themselves telling their stories, and their wives being, one of the wives wiped down the fog. At night is one of the very dangerous times when they're sweating. If you lay next to one of them or you touch someone, and she wiped the fog or mist from the mirror on the headboard, put it up to her face, breathed in. She is now in a wheelchair dying. This is a letter from a Gulf War veteran. Kind of sets the tone. I sit here and wonder why this is happening. It's not supposed to be this way. I look around me and I see my world crumbling, my dreams evaporating, and my hopes disappearing. I grasp for the thread that is my final hope, that all of this is going to work out. How did it come to this? My husband went to Saudi Arabia in 1990. I was pregnant with our first and perhaps only child. It seemed so simple. The air war was first. That was good. It meant less problems for those who would follow on the ground. We knew things were happening before the military did, or so it seemed. It all appeared so benign, when really it was all a staged production. Only the majority of the cast didn't know. The government of the United States of America made a decision that 700,000 plus people that were fighting against Saddam Hussein were expendable. They shot them up with experimental vaccines and drugs in the name of protection, and then exposed them to lethal weapons of mass destruction, and sat back to see what happened. The parades at homecoming were innumerable, the pats on the back countless. But where are all those well-wishers now? Now that those who served are dying, not dying of obvious things like gunshot wounds or mortar blasts, but rather dying a slow death from exposures too numerous to count. Dying in ignorance because the government that sent them isn't letting them in on their little secret. When my husband joined the Army, we were both prepared for him to have to defend what we believed in. We were prepared to sacrifice the ultimate gift in order to ensure that this great country would endure for our children to inherit. What we weren't prepared for was to have the same country turn their collective backs on us and ignore us as we cried for help. We weren't prepared to be a part of the sick experiment that some desk jockey dreamed up without considering the consequences. We weren't prepared to have our sacrifice be meaningless. I have watched a very vital and proud man grow old before his time. I have watched as he attempted to spend some time with our daughter, only to catch the look in his eyes as he remembers that he may be killing her as he plays with her. I have watched this man that I love takes me in his arms to make love to me, and then hesitates, wondering if he is killing me too. I have seen how he and others are treated by those that caused this, and it infuriates me. The men and women who went and the families they left behind deserve better than this. This country was founded on integrity, honesty, and freedom, both personal and as a collective whole. That is not what I see now. I see a government that is so filled with corruption that it no longer serves the people, but rather serves itself. I see a country of individuals that has become disinterested in what happens in their own country and to their fellow citizens. I see something worse than communism, in that communism is a professed government of hardship. What we have is a lie covered up with appearances. My mother is from Germany, a naturalized citizen. I remember when she was studying for her citizenship test, how we used to talk about this country's beginnings. She would often tell me that the people in this country only thought they were free. But in reality, the people in this country were more oppressed than some of the communist states. I always thought my mother was a little crazy for thinking that. Until now, she's right. I want someone to pay for this, not only for my husband, our daughter, and me, but for all the families who have been pulled into this gigantic game of Russian roulette. I want the dreams that my husband and I had to become a reality. For those of you who are out there, who are the spouse or loved one of a Gulf veteran, please do not give up hope. You did not do this to yourself or your loved one. Seek out other Gulf War families to talk with, because right now they are the only ones who really understand what you are feeling. Our loved ones went over to Saudi and our soldiers to protect and serve this great country and what it was founded on. We remained at home supporting them and their cause. The wounds they brought home have been passed to family and friends. Now we are all soldiers fighting, not only to preserve our great country, but to live. The battle remains. Only the enemy has changed. There was a man, thank you. Thank you. There was a man a long time ago by the name of William Wallace that said, "All men will surely die. Few men ever truly live." America, you've got to wake up, because Gulf War syndrome and what happened and the crimes involved in the Gulf War affects you. It affects your freedom. It affects the Constitution. They're bringing the war to you. Just going out and getting guns and rations and supplies and gas masks, that's not what's needed. I do not recommend any type of violence. I do, however, carry a gun, and I do, however, own weapons, and of course, if they bring the fight to me, I'll have no choice but to defend myself. But America, what you need to do is get involved, because we have an outbreak, and there is a specific purpose to suspend the Constitution of the United States. You can't allow them to get away with it. Your family may become afflicted with this virus. It takes a couple of years to manifest itself. By the time you may be diagnosed, it'll be too late for you, because, you see, doxycycline, it's very easy for the government to one day, after the 1996 election, say, sorry, you can't buy it anymore, it's outlawed. It's very easy, because the government can do anything they want to do. You'll have no choice. And unless you accept the chip, unless you accept the national ID card, you will not get treatment. The time to act is now. I thank you very much for coming. Thank you for listening to what we have to say. I know you may have questions. If you do, Joyce Riley will come back up and entertain those questions with me. I'd like to say just one thing to you all. Freedom! Freedom! Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I'll back up. I think maybe a lot of you had an idea of what it was going to be tonight, but I don't think any of us had an idea of how deep it really is. Are there any questions out there? And I can barely see you. I think I see you now. Okay.
Not a question. I just wanted to let you know that 29 Palm Base Marine Base in 29 Palm, California, there is some sort of a strange pneumonia
Thank you. Yeah.
What she's saying is that 29 Palms is being affected by a strange pneumonia-like, and they're leaving the facility. I got a phone call the other night from Camp Pendleton also that they have a tremendous number of people out there that are sick, as well as Camp Lejeune, the base in North Carolina.
Seymour Johnson?
Seymour Johnson. They're also complaining of a lot of people being sick. Let me just say that, to make this clear, mycoplasma is one of the biologicals. When that combines with the other biologicals, we get very strange, diverse kinds of symptoms and kinds of problems. But some of the other diseases, the beta hemolytic strep, if you're familiar with that, that is causing the flesh-eating disease. Did you hear of that before 1990, before Desert Storm? No. Did you hear of Lyme disease before 1990? Did you hear much about CFIDs or chronic fatigue before 1990? These are items that were genetically engineered that are now being contagions throughout the population. So there's many of them. They were released mostly through the Scud B and Frog missiles. So many of the military people are sick, and they say they can hardly even go to work right now, let alone go to war.
Okay?
We don't know how to force them, because we're here to wake America up, and we hope that you will take what we've said and spread it, because, yeah, they have antidotes. If you've seen the movie Outbreak, they kind of give you, if you haven't seen it, you need to see that movie. All of these movies are based on some form of truth that are leaked out. You know, everybody in the government, most of these spooks that work on things, they have some sort of gigantic egos, and they leak to people, and that's how stories are written. But the movie with Dustin Hoffman that was out some time ago gives you an idea. Of course, movies all have a nice ending and all of those types of things, and it was only contained to one little town. But imagine, we're not even saying that Gulf War illness spreads as fast as what you saw in the movie. Imagine if it really did. And they're telling you, in the movie they showed you it was contained in one town. But what happened there? You had the military acting against the civilian population. Okay? Same as in Waco and other situations. And of course, in the movie, they made it that, well, the military wouldn't fire upon the helicopter, and so the day was saved and the mission was accomplished. That's not going to happen in real life. If you have ever served in the military and you were given an order, you see a plane in your way, and you're in I'll tell you what, if I'm in a plane and I see something in my way, I'm going to blast it out of the sky. So it is very dangerous what's happening, but it's very hard to make them fess up. Now, what you can do is support the American Gulf War Veterans Association, pass the information along. Now, one way they'll have to do something about it is, even if I die, the evidence is, and not even if I die, when I die, it's only a matter of time when they get me. I'm just more dangerous to them now because I've gone so public, going on shows like the Chuck Harder Show. We've been doing, the Nicholsons, Joyce Riley and myself have independently been doing radio shows. We do maybe 1 or 2 per day, 7 days a week. Sometimes the Nicholsons have, I think Joyce has done 4 shows per day. So the word is out there so much so that they're putting out propaganda in the mainstream media to try and counter what we're doing. But my suit, it was up for hearing on the 24th, again, this motion to dismiss. And finally, for the first time in America, it is in the court records that, in fact, the PIT plant, chemical weapons, biologicals, all this type of stuff, the U.S. attorney managed, the judge said, you've managed to scare and inflame the court, because basically it was filled with federal agents, and federal agents got scared. Everybody in there was armed to the teeth. They had even female federal agents. For little old me, the door. But the bottom line is they're going to have to deal with my suit, because I filed some very important motions prior to going in. And if I can get a judgment against these agents, what it means is part of what I get is the evidence that you need. They're going to have to come out with it. And we need funding. If the Nicholsons, by the way, can get the money, if I work with the Nicholsons, there's some information I can't release. There's lots more I could put up here that I don't have with me, and could say if we took more time. You didn't hear it all, believe me. But I know of certain things, and between sharing that between the Nicholsons and Riley and myself, the thing is we need money. They cannot do research. So we can, in other words, we can work this out, but as far as just putting a gun to one guy's head, there is no, it's like going to Ma Bell, there's no one person who is Mother Bell. It's an entity, and so forcing them is very hard. But you need to move on it, and if you call your local media, I think that's very important. If you call your radio stations, if you call your newspapers and you go, hey, listen, here's stuff. We'll give you documents. We'll give you tape recordings. You're not putting any of this out. This is real because we got evidence. You're not telling the people of America. What you need is for the people that call themselves Americans but have never read the Constitution or Bill of Rights, and they're the ones who will dare to call a patriot something nasty. I remember when the word patriot, you were proud to be called a patriot. The bombing of the Murrah building changed that, and that was a deliberate act. There's a lot more to say about the bombing of the Murrah building and the evidence that was contained therein. Okay, it was to put a definite rift between the mainstream America and the patriots, and to blacken what patriots stand for. See, the government and Congress, they all know that they're cheating you with the Federal Reserve. They know that the money that they collect in taxes, not one penny goes back to you. Every dollar that goes into the Treasury is not the Treasury of the United States, but the Treasury of the International Monetary Fund and the Agency for International Development. I'm telling you. There's a whole talk we could do on what's going on with your taxes and why the debt is really 26 trillion. It will never be repaid. And why America? Why are they doing this wetland confiscation? They're confiscating your land. Why you really don't own your land? You think you own your real estate? You don't own it. And that's why they're selling you out. Congress have sold you out. The congressmen know it. They know what's really going on, which is why the New World Order is about to move on you. Why have they got to do this? Well, and they're ready because the technology is now there to create this germ warfare. You see, the New World Order isn't so new. It's been something that they're trying to get implemented. But it's come to pass as a result of the Persian Gulf War and the tests that I didn't get into, all of it, that were conducted to be able to inflict people, and of course they have an antidote, but to control the population. But they've got to suspend the Constitution because they cannot continue to just raise the taxes. The patriots are becoming more aware. It is the patriots and not the American in the street that calls themselves American that understand what the IRS is. And so the IRS and the Federal Reserve Board and the International Monetary Fund are terrified that more people, that patriots, will educate the other people that call themselves Americans, and that people may not be so quick to start paying tax. Now, if 20, 30, 40, 50% of the tax base get hip to what's going on and don't pay, you see what's happening is the Congress borrows money on your ability to repay. But they've never been repaying the money, you see. And so the nation has been going completely in debt, and whilst they're filling their pockets on the money they borrow, then they go out and tax you and pay back the bankers, but then they go back and go, oh, we've got a budget this year, but they're never balancing the budget. But it's a very long story about it, but that is why the time is ripe, and they have no choice, because you see the bankers, it's like if you go to the bank and borrow money, they say, what we got as collateral? They say, we got slave Americans. You know, we tax the people, and so we can pay you back with them. Well, that's been working up till now, but the debt is so high, they can't even pay the interest on the debt. So the international bankers, which are the people that conduct war, they tell the president, who is our enemy? Let's go make a war so that we can deplete the bombs that we've made, that defense contractors make, so that we can sell weapons to other nations, so that they can buy them to defend themselves. You know that document I showed you that unelected governments, unelected, you know what an unelected government is? That's like a coup. That's like terrorists in terrorist nations. So that America arms these people, sells them weapons, then we go and sell the opposition weapons to fight the other guys that we just armed. And then we go and send our troops, men and women, Americans, to a foreign nation to die and shed their blood because American government tells you it's in your national interest. What are we doing in Iraq right now? What do we care what Iraq is doing? They're all the way over there. Hey, don't send none of our guys or men or women back there to die. I don't care what Saddam Hussein is doing. He's not coming here. If he does, I'll be the first one to pick up a gun and go against him. Okay? They're creating these scenarios for a reason. So I'm sorry to be so long-winded. See, if you get me going, I can't quit because I got a lot to say. And I know that between the two of us, we've kept you here a long time, but we got a lot to say. Yeah, go ahead.
What's the requirement for biologicals to survive outside the host, and what's the lifespan of somebody?
Well, it's 7 years, but go ahead. Yeah. The microbes themselves live for 7 years in the gas masks themselves and other things, but if you want to address it further, go ahead.
I really can't address it any further than to say that that is the concern, is it can remain alive. That's why we're concerned about the equipment. There wasn't decontamination done on the equipment, so duffel bags, uniforms that weren't laundered, that kind of thing. Aircraft came back. That's how some of it was transferred to the guys that were on aircraft carriers that got the Gulf War disease that weren't even in country.
Are Bush and his wife cured of this disease, or do they still have it?
I'm sorry?
Bush.
Great disease.
Yeah, he wanted to be a hero, and somebody didn't tell him, like, yeah, you know, or maybe the plan was to eliminate him after he was served the purpose of the satanic cultist group. But yes, the Graves' disease, again, the dog, his wife, and their dog coming down with Gulf War illness, they were treated by the Nicholsons, by the way, which George Bush will not see. Here again is the President of the United States. Now, the Nicholsons, I asked them, and they are doctors, and they cannot refuse treatment. I know you're going to say, well, why did they treat George Bush? They responded to me in writing on that, because I asked them that question. They wrote to me and said, we treated George. I wrote back and said, George? You refer to him by his first name. Are you guys buddies? Because if so, I want nothing to do with you. It was a Freudian slip, or that's the way they talk, because, of course, the Nicholsons are very, you know, they're up there, and they refer to people by first name and call them George. But, in fact, they treated George Bush, his wife, and I don't know what happened to the dog, but it may be dormant in him, and they have to keep retaking so he may be a carrier or not, but we don't know. But he was sick with it, yes. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah, it also starts, he's asking about FinCEN. It also calls for the Federal Information Network. Yes, and if you think TRW and all of the credit reporting agencies are collecting information you don't want them to have, they've got a profile on every American. FinCEN is collecting a profile on the color of your hair, if you like your hair short or long, what you eat, do you like Chinese food or not, where your relatives are. If you were to become a government fugitive and they had to track you down, they know, do you like cold weather or not? Where would you most likely to go? They are collecting a profile on every American because, in fact, at some point, very short time, the time we say is 2 years after the '96 election, we think they're going to make a move. 1997 is very critical. I don't pretend to know everything, but from, I get leaks. I still have friends on the inside. Information comes in. Joyce Riley. Now that the Nicholsons get information from federal agents because they've helped assassins. See, one of the reasons we're alive is because some of the people that were sent to kill us, they themselves got the disease, just like the national security agent who went to the White House to talk to Hillary Clinton. He got arrested. Oh, he found out real fast, even though he was in the NSA. So what happened is you find out real fast that you become an outsider, even though you're within the government. When you got the disease, nobody wants to know you. So, yes. Well, yeah, but I think we're going to be here a long length of time if we get it. I think everybody knows about all those terms you're talking about, the MJTF and FinCEN and in fact, FEMA, okay, Federal Emergency Management. Oh, yeah, they're not for FEMA. By the way, you see those new antennas going up, those towers with the triangular shape and the on the top of them, and then they have the rectangular heads, microwave, and the ELFs and the antenna pointed down. They've got a nationwide emergency, they call it, communication system around the United States now. They're getting ready. They can mobilize all of the MJTF and all of the forces. And there's a lot of things that go on, and I don't want to get a little weird on you. Some people will not understand this about mind control, and yeah, there are a lot of things that go on. What I'm trying to do is not pollute you. There's so much that we put on you, your brain will start, melting, mental, or something. But we want to talk about the crimes, because look, it starts with Gulf War, the Gulf War illness, the crimes. If we nail them with that, we can stop what's going on. But there's so much to know. Yes, the lady over. Yeah.
The only thing that we know of for sure are cats and dogs. They usually get some type of neuromuscular disease. Their back two legs become very weak, and they have chronic fatigue also. Essentially the same type of presentation that you would see in the adult would be, or in the human would be in the animal. This is one of the first cases of cross-species transmission of a disease, and so that's why it is so significant. One thing I wanted to mention, when he talked about the HIV envelope being included in the mycoplasma, let me just explain for you the reason they do this. Mycoplasma is something that occurred before Gulf War. Mycoplasma is something that you get in upper respiratory infections and in urinary tract infections. It is communicable, and it normally doesn't hurt the normal adult. What they have done is they have genetically rearranged the mycoplasma and added in other things to it because it is such a good vehicle to transmit. So when they added 40% of the HIV envelope, what you get are HIV symptoms. You do not get the HIV virus. You cannot get AIDS from the Mycoplasma incognitus, at least as it stands now. You have to have 100% of the virus to get AIDS. So all I can say is that with the animals, we're seeing that they are helped by doxycycline too. So I know my veterinarian is looking at using doxycycline and doing a study on it. Any more questions? Any more questions?
One there, one there, one here. What is it?
Okay, right here.
When Peter showed that one slide, the one listed war, liberation, and Kuwait, there were two little columns there that had dates, arms deals.
That's Robert Gates, CIA director and henchman for George Bush, who was brought in take over from William Webster. Robert Gates. Yes, sir.
If this uniform, cats, dogs, household pets, what is likely this to be transmitted to the farm animals like our dairy cows, our meat products, pork products?
Yeah. I deal with the crimes, and I'm going to kick butt with that. We don't know, but there's something that was admitted on a show I did in Detroit that the black population is aware of, and that in fact a lot of testing, as you know, a lot of things in the school program and the lunch program, yeah, and in milk. So in some of the dairy products, I think one of the things you really need to do is start looking in alternative sources of food supply, growing your own vegetables, stay away from a lot of the dairy products. We are not experts and don't claim to be on everything, and we don't know everything. We pass on what we know, but yeah, there are problems, and of course, people are sending us evidence now, not only Gulf War veterans, and so much evidence is coming in, but people are sending us evidence of other things that are happening. And it is that we just, this is so big already. We are really, do you understand what's happening? I'm not trying to be a martyr here, but do you understand what happens when you stand up and speak out against the government? We have actually said that they have committed a war crime. The history of the United States has never seen a war crime against the Geneva Convention. So we're alive today because of the grace of God, because it's meant to be, because maybe there's a way to stop this. Maybe, there's a lot of maybes. And they are counting that mainstream America, if they killed us, it would be a little too obvious, because they'd have to kill me, then kill Joyce, then kill the Nicholsons. And some of the assassins that they did send, in fact, people have gone to Nancy Nicholson. They've treated them. In other words, so there's a lot of reasons, but they're counting that you don't you consider this like a night out at the movies, and you go home and like tomorrow you just get back on with your business and you don't do anything. And that's what they're counting on. That, you see, they only need to buy a little more time, like till after the election. You're going to start to see a lot more changes. You're seeing it in the newspapers every day. So changes are being made, and they're like pumping laws out, that illegal laws, but they're calling them laws that you don't get to know about. And one day you're going to wake up, and it's going to be an America that, it's going to be an America with a K, the USS of A, and you're going to be, very sorry if you did not do something. We're not here to scare you, and we're here to bring you the information, but I'll tell you, this is very, very real. And you're charged now, because we've made you have to make other people know. We don't want you to do anything crazy, please. We don't want to, we don't want Janet Reno coming to us and go, see, because you guys did this thing, you incited a riot, and some guy went in with an AK-47 in a McDonald's or a Burger King or something. Look, please, that's not the way it's going to be resolved. You got weapons, keep them oiled, keep them loaded, whatever. Keep them ready for when they come to you, but that's not what it's going to take. We need to do this by educating the rest of America, okay? Yes, sir. Well, let the lady over there, please. Yes. Go ahead.
Absolutely. What we're going to do is we're now planning a march on Washington in which we're going to make it so big and so obvious that they're going to have to deny us, or they're going to have to keep us out of Washington. But we want all people that support the Desert Stormers, all veterans, and we want to go to Washington. And that's what we're going to be organizing with the American Gulf War Veterans Association. That's right. That's right. The main thing is right now is education. We've got to get it in the media. And if you have connections with the media, have them call us. I gave my number, 713-587-5437. That's 713-587-5437. Have them call us. We've got to get this. I don't care if it's the little weekly newspaper that you have. We've got to get this story known to people.
Yeah, one of the, I believe it's a base commander, printed some of my information in the base newspaper, show you how bad the government is shutting it down. He was called by General Blank the next day and relieved of duty. So the active duty military are not, they're only getting this in dribs and drabs, and so now you've got to do something about it, and we need your support. If it wasn't for this gentleman and his group that brought us here today, we wouldn't be able to come here. They have broken me financially. I'm fighting a suit. I'm fighting the IRS. I'm fighting the federal bank, and I'm fighting I'm fighting like the powers that be, and they are using your tax dollars to have U.S. attorneys fight me in court, representing terrorist federal agents that I have proven that their own documents prove they've committed the crime. And what they're trying to say is, hey, they should have immunity. It doesn't matter what they've done. They should have immunity. They'll never do that for you. So we need your help to get it out, get the information out, and to support the American Gulf War Veterans Association so that we can have what exactly you suggested. Yeah, things can be done, and that's got to start here. Yes, yes. We, in fact, did. I didn't bring the NBC logs. The lady asked about, do we know whether or not we actually used chemical and biologicals. In fact, the NBC logs from CENTCOM proves that the United States gave Schwarzkopf the authority to use chemical and biologicals, and I have Gulf War veterans that are dying now that I'm getting them to sign affidavits. They are terrified to come forward because they will be persecuted. The Pentagon actually threatens the armed services. Anyone, if you're in the military, you will be actually threatened, and they'll send people to come get you. Or the next time you go into the VA for aspirins, you'll get something else other than an aspirin, and you'll be dead. Okay, so they're trying to shut them down, but there are Gulf War veterans now that I can't name that I can produce in a court of law. If America supports them, they need to know. The letter I wrote to you, these are people telling us stuff They need to know. See, they don't see America caring. They see that America doesn't understand, and a lot of them are so weak, and they're losing their homes. They're living in trailers. They can't hold a job. So most of them are men. Although there are women in the armed services too. But what happens is that the breadwinner, the one who's the breadwinner, can't hold a job. You get discharged from the service, and then you're passing it on to the family member, and the kids are being born deformed. I mean, it's unbelievable what's happening, and America doesn't see that. We're not seeing it because you're not seeing people drop like flies in front of you, but they're dropping all over. They're dying all over. Yes?
Just as an add-on to that is that they're not testing any of them, or they're not treating any of them, regardless of what it is. They're giving them a psychiatric disease disorder, putting them on psychiatric drugs, and sending them home. So it's very sad. Somebody else had a question over here? Okay. Okay, go ahead. I want to thank the security guys tonight. You were wonderful to take care of us tonight. Thank you very much.
But this dexacycline, what's the average dosage as agents?
I'll be glad to give you that information. It's 100 milligrams BID or twice a day, but for about 10 days and sometimes up to 6 weeks course or 6 courses of it. So it takes quite a while.
I'd like to ask how many people in the audience are affected or have some of the symptoms, like the rash?
How many people have some of those symptoms you saw up there? A lot of people. Mm-hmm. Okay, you're a Desert Stormer? And where were you in Desert Storm?
North of Upper Alpine, 410th evacuation hospital, we see a lot of EPWs, a lot of first cav, first armored out of people carrying those kinds of weapons. I'm working for PDA, and I've seen people from my own unit coming through that are not doing well, and some of them I'm not even sure they're still alive. And the doxycycline treatment, I was going to ask about that, because I just read this and it says it's not a cure, it's a treatment. Right.
That's right. And you need to know, he's asking, just for the sake of video recording here, he's asking, or stating that he was Hafar al-Batin, and that in the first cav, in support of the first cav, and that you've been treated with doxycycline and you're wondering about it being a treatment versus an antidote or versus a cure. It is only a treatment. And when you go into remission, that's when you need to repeat it. And of course, you need to be talking to your physician who needs to get the information from us. We're not treating and we're not physicians. Great. That's the best way to do it. That's the best way to do it. Absolutely. That's a good idea. Yes.
Do you have any idea if the video will be available and when I'll answer that one.
He stole my thunder. We are going to have a video available of this, and we think we can do it for $10. So if you'll check with Judy here who want to sign up for it, okay?
That's the number.
Yeah. That phone number I gave you, 713-587-5437. Right, if you call that number. Yes.
Have you guys considered trying to consolidate some of this information and put it on the net? I think that'd be a great way of trying to get it.
That's right. There's a lot of propaganda on the net right now. There's a lot of government propaganda. You have to be careful what you read on the net. Yes, it is going to be going on the net very soon. We've got several people that are helping us out with that, and it will be there.
Yeah, we haven't made them available yet, but yes, through the American Gulf War Veterans Association, some of that and lots more. You'll be able to get to see some of that evidence that we're going to do. Not sure how we're going to put it out, and again, all of this takes organizing, and where Joyce Riley lives in Texas, I live in Florida, where we have to self-fund this. There is no money coming from anywhere, and I'm fighting everything, we're fighting this independently. So, but we're going to get that to where you can actually get copies of juicy details and actual evidence and things that you've seen up on the screen. We're going to have that. Just go ahead and call and get on the list, and we'll have that information coming out.
I'm sorry? You can't get any prescriptions for who? Oh, the pets. Just take the information to your veterinarian. Right. That's exactly what everybody's thinking. Yeah, the hip problems is what the animals are having. Have them call me. Have your veterinarian call me. I'll have them talk to my veterinarian. Let me also say, with regard to the information you saw here tonight, I am one person doing all of this, and I answer all the phone calls, and I get about 100 phone calls a day. The Nicholsons get 1,000 phone calls a day. I am the one in the office doing all the letters and doing everything. So please don't call and ask right now for just like one piece of paper or one document, because it's just, I've got 500 letters on my floor right now that I get to go home to from the Desert Stormers. But please, if you would, sign up to be a supporter of the Gulf War Veterans Association. We'll send you the newsletter, and then in the newsletter you'll find out how to get the information Peter's going to put. He's going to put it into a book so that it can all be documented, kind of like the War Powers Act. Well, I don't have it with me. If you'll just call that number, it'll tell you what to do. It'll tell you how to reach Peter. Also, if you have evidence. Let me say this. If you are a Desert Stormer and you have evidence, that we need also. And Peter, why don't you address that issue?
Yeah, of course, my phone lines are unsecured, but that doesn't stop us from, I give them a DB test every day to make sure they're getting a good recording. Chuck Harder, CIA called Chuck Harder and told him they download, Satlink, they take his show. They took the show Joyce Riley and I were on. So, oh yeah, where? What, the hotel? With an hour and a half after doing the Chuck Harder For the People show that Joyce Riley and I did, federal agents were at my door, at my house, although I was up there. They were threatening someone who was staying at the home. After that, we left the Chuck Harder facility in White Springs, and I was staying at a hotel, and we were going to schedule to do another taping. Joyce Riley, they abandoned the lobby of the hotel. The cash register and the phone system, the radio station that we were supposed to be on, was dialing in, letting it ring 50 times. Joyce Riley went into the lobby, manned the PBX. She's got a picture of me with my gun in my hand and the phone in the other. Patched the radio station through. They broke into a Bogreitz transmission, one of his broadcasts, put me on live, and I believe that's sort of like how we made it through that one. Skated out of that building. We evaded anyone who was with us, had to go to a little general store, 95-degree weather from a payphone, continued broadcast. So it isn't so much that people just want us dead all the time, although they are looking for ways, but it's not easy. As I said, why don't you, hey, come on. Come here. I'd like for Les to relate just a little bit about what happened about the gun and or about the tail we picked up.
Well, I think he pretty well told it. When I picked him up, he said, I have to get some luggage. So I waited out in the van. He came out and he said, it's not there. And I didn't know what not there was. And then he says, well, I won't need this. And I found out it was the keys for the gun case. So we went and picked up Joyce at another terminal. And we got down to the motel, and we saw a van, or pickup, I should say, that was going to turn right. And all of a sudden, when we turned left, they did a fancy left. And so we bypassed the motel we were planning to go to and did some circling and all that, and came back, found that was not adequate, but they were still sort of around. Went to another one, and while we were at the counter where they saw that it followed us over there. So, and he told you about calling up and not delivering the gun, and I went back and got it. So it was an interesting evening.
I wanted to interrupt him only for one thing, because I want you to know that he's my hero too now, because you see, we didn't think about it. He volunteered to go back after we gave them the the U.S. Army depot to deliver the gun to, and they like backed out of that one. So Les says, I'll take the paper, I'll go get the gun for you. After he left, the Ford light went on. I go, what if they put a bomb in the gun case? I was really concerned for him. I had no way of reaching him. And so I want you to know that whether he knows it or not, he took a big risk in going back and getting my gun for me. And so I want to thank him, and he's my buddy now. Thank you. Thank you.
And when I did bring the gun back, he took it in the bathroom to open it up in case it exploded. Okay, we have back over there, I think it's...
The CDC, they're not talking to me about it. They're denying it. They're saying that they're so busy with the Ebola virus, they don't have time for the mycoplasma.
Has the DOD addressed this at all through their EMS department? They're responsible for EMS.
The DOD, as far as I know, has not addressed this issue with EMS or anyone else. They're denying it. They're categorically denying it. Just so you understand, they must continue to deny the mycoplasma, because the Nicholsons can prove it was germ warfare, and if we can prove that's germ warfare like we can, then they cannot possibly, I mean, they just can't admit to it, because that means then that they were guilty of proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, and it's been illegal to do that since 1972. So they are not even allowing active duty military to have doxycycline, and they are not admitting to the mycoplasma. So they have to continue to deny it. So as far as anything other than that, I don't know. I'm afraid we'll get arrested first. That's right.
Yes. So.
You know, he mentioned the Patriots helping out with security. Peter can talk more about that, but I do want to thank the Houston militia, because they have been very helpful to me in document transfers with the Nicholsons and all. And the militia, as I understand, the North Texas Constitutional Militia is going to be bringing it up at the national meeting that they develop or adopt a program for the Gulf War veterans. In other words, the militia has decided that they want to stand up for the American veterans, and I think that's really tremendous.
Is it one?
Yes, Joyce, question about the anthrax vaccine. You know, was in, they told us that they were giving us a vaccine. They called anthrax.
It may or may not have been anthrax. A lot of people did receive the anthrax, and it was a very damaging inoculation to receive also. It was not a healthy inoculation. Anthrax, there's a lot that's not known about it right now. Most of the immunizations may or may not have been what you thought they were. That's the problem. A lot of people don't even have it documented in their shot record. And I can't say individually, but unfortunately, there are a lot of people that have gotten sick from the anthrax.
I'd like to say that I did several shows on Nurse Talk Radio. One of them addresses the INDs, or investigational new drugs, or investigational new products, and vaccines and things. We did a separate tape and a separate show of information Gulf War veterans, which now the public also can know, and questions you can even nail the DOD or the VA or anyone with, because I put out a lot of technical information on that specific show regarding questions of anthrax and or these experimental drugs. And by the way, treatment for Alzheimer's has just now come out, and so there are a lot of tests conducted in the Persian Gulf War for the purposes of making money, not just for killing people, but also to bypass the years of clinical trials required by the FDA to get these drugs approved. So what they did is created a war, an emergency situation, get you to sign that little informed consent waiver, and then they say, hey, it's an emergency, we have nothing else to treat you with but this experimental thing. And lo and behold, after the Persian Gulf War, you have a lot of medicines on the market now that never had the years of clinical trials. So there are a lot of ways that we can nail either the FDA themselves or the government or the DOD and the VA. So there are a lot of ways to go, but there's so much information, and we didn't even put it up here.
Is this an act of war by the United States government against the American people?
Is this an act of war by the United States government against the American people? You've just answered it. Really, what it is you know, you got to ask yourself who is the United States government and who is running the country, making laws and then claiming you're a terrorist. Meanwhile, they're the terrorists. I don't know. So will the real terrorists stand up? So I got a problem with that. But you know, I'm trying not to overstep my bounds. I want to keep breathing out of my nose for a little while longer. So that I can get the word out. When I'm dead, it's okay. There'll be enough tapes. The evidence is already there. If they take care of me, it still won't go away. I want you to support what Joyce Riley and the Nicholsons are doing, and or what the real thrust is. Beware of imposters. The government at some point is going to have to attack us, even if they're either going to, you know, we're getting too well known or the word is spreading. So maybe killing us isn't going to be the way to go, or killing us over a period of time is what they'll do. But we're on the top of the list. But they're going to try and discredit us in some manner or bring out some other credible source or some other disinformation. Check it out. Check anything we're telling you out. Seek out the truth. Those who have ears, let them hear.
So basically what you're saying then is that the United States government has used our Gulf War veterans as time bomb and CBR attack against this country.
Basically, yes. Well, sir, then what do? We're trying to, we need to bring the, please do not, you know, that's not what we're here for. We don't want to turn this into something where, again, we will get the blame, just as Janet Reno wants to blame Linda Thompson for something that happened in Waco that Janet Reno did. Okay, so please, it is very, very serious, and but we need to do something about it, and that something is we need to do something peaceably about it. Try that first anyway. That's what we need to do. Okay?
I might interject here that probably one of the things that's happening right now is what Peter's doing with this trial. And so we need to support him in that effort. And I think that will do it.
Do y'all see why I say that Peter Kawaja is a hero? Because what he's been doing for 5 years, he deserves it, believe me. What he's been doing for 5 years behind, with nobody even knowing it, nobody supporting him. He has no income now. I have no income now. I'm doing this full time. I mean, but what he has been doing with no income and fighting the federal government is, to me, it's remarkable. I can't imagine anyone else that could have done this, or that would have had the desire when he was offered so much money by the federal government not to do it. He continued on, and I just think that is remarkable.
One thing I'd like Peter to do is tell him about the gas mask on Thursday. Silver light, remember? Caution.
Oh! What? My match out to the court? Yeah. Well, you know, there's one way to nail these guys. Just as they arrested the national security agent for being a threat to national security because he was going to touch the First Lady. When I went to court, I don't know if, are you familiar with the Joe Love scenario? That was one way. There was a fear by many that I was going to be arrested. They were going to either get me to fly off the handle because there were the things they were saying in there. You just get so mad, you want to, you know. So to prove a point, I took a mask and I marked on it, warning, Gulf War illness, contagious. And I wore it into the courtroom. You got to picture this, little old me and all these federal agents with weapons. It was illegal for them to do that. They had so many federal agents with weapons. They locked the courtroom doors with the key. They had the walkie-talkies. They changed rooms. They did all kinds of stuff. Guys there with beards, scars, I mean, you know, real terrible looking animals. But the federal agents, when I came in and I wore it on my arm instead of on my wrist, and then I'd go, all these big 8-foot tall, whatever they were, with guns and walkie-talkies. They like vacated the seats. They ended up sitting in the jury boxes, staying away from me. In other words, what I really did was I wanted to go and shake the hand with the judge, but they all stayed away. They were just like terrified to come in close contact with me. So I'll tell you what, if you got to go to the court for a traffic ticket, maybe you can try that. I mean, it's not really a laughing, it's a joke, but... So they're saying it's not contagious, in other words. So what I want to do, Gulf War veterans, go hug some of them. You know, thank you.
I thought that might be a nice way to close the evening. Again.